Welcome back everyone. Today, we're continuing with the next part of this series, called What If Goku Remembered the Saiyans? My name is Ash. Please, for me, drop a like and subscribe to the page. Also leave your comments down below. With that, let's begin. Bardock, Krillin, Tien, and Bulma landed softly in the middle of a quiet Namekian village, the dusty ground crunching underfoot. As the ship's door slid open, Bulma quickly pulled out her radar, eyes fixed on the small, blinking dot. "The radar says the Dragon Ball is somewhere here," Bulma said, tapping at the screen as her son gently set her down beside him. Krillin squinted, scanning the peaceful scene before him. "Well, I guess we should ask the locals, right?" he suggested, adjusting his posture. Just as the words left his mouth, 3 elder Namekians appeared from the village huts, their robes fluttering in the wind. The one in the middle stepped forward, his wrinkled face calm yet guarded. "I am Elder Muri," he introduced himself, his voice steady. "What brings you to our village?" Bardock didn't waste time with formalities. "We're here for a Dragon Ball," he said bluntly. Muri's face remained still, though his eyes sharpened slightly. "And what do you need a Dragon Ball for?" he asked, his tone cautious. Tien stepped forward, folding his arms across his chest. "We're trying to wish our friends back to life. They were killed when some bad guys attacked our home planet," he explained, his voice heavy with seriousness. Muri's gaze softened slightly, and he nodded. "We understand your pain," he said. "We've had similar problems ourselves." Before anyone could respond, the air around them grew tense as all the warriors present felt the sudden, violent flicker of energy signatures vanishing in the distance. Tien and Bardock exchanged grim looks. "They're exterminating the villages," one of the other Namekian elders muttered, his voice shaking. "We still don't know who they are or what they want, but none of our warriors have been able to stop them." Bulma glanced down at the radar again, her face going pale. "They're after the Dragon Balls," she said, a sudden realization dawning on her. "They're probably going from village to village, killing anyone who doesn't tell them where the Dragon Balls are." Krillin clenched his fists, anger flickering in his eyes. "We can't let them gather all the Dragon Balls," he said firmly. Bardock nodded. "They're likely using scouters to locate the villages," he said. "We should hide this Dragon Ball somewhere they can't find it." Muri frowned deeply, his voice filled with concern. "And how does that help my people?" he asked. "They will just continue their slaughter until they get what they want." Bulma took a step forward, holding up the radar for everyone to see. "They've already collected 5 of the Dragon Balls," she said, her voice shaky. "The one here is the closest to their location." Krillin's expression darkened as he glanced around the village. "Then, they'll be heading this way soon. Do you have any warriors?" Tien asked, stepping toward Muri. "We have 3 warriors in this village," Muri said. Bulma looked around nervously. "We need to evacuate the village and hide the Dragon Ball," she said quickly. Bardock, however, seemed unconvinced. He shook his head. "If they're using scouters to track the villages, they'll just follow us. I think we need to make a stand here," he said, crossing his arms, determination etched across his face. Krillin looked at him incredulously. "Have you felt how strong these guys are? We won't stand much of a chance fighting them head on," he said, his voice rising in disbelief. Bardock's eyes narrowed. "But we can't just let this village get wiped out," he shot back. "With the warriors here, we might actually have a chance." Krillin sighed and shook his head. "Can you sense any powers strong enough to beat what's coming?" he asked, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. Bardock closed his eyes for a moment, extending his senses across the village. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes. "No," he admitted, his voice grim. "The strongest power I can feel here is probably around 3,000. Just then, Tien's eyes flicked to the east, and he frowned. "Wait, there's another strong energy coming from the east," he said. "It's way stronger than the others." Muri nodded slowly. "That would be near Guru's place," he said, his voice thoughtful. Krillin perked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Is this Guru guy strong?" he asked. "He is the elder of all our people," Muri said with reverence, "but his guardian, Nail, is the strongest Namekian we have." Krillin quickly put the pieces together. "Then we should hide the Dragon Ball somewhere, evacuate the village, and make our stand at Guru's place," he said, a plan forming in his mind. But Muri shook his head, his expression firm. "We cannot lead them to Guru," he said. "We must protect the father of our people above all else." Bardock's eyes hardened with resolve. "I'll go see if this Nail will help us," he said. "In the meantime, we need to stall those enemies and hide the villagers until my dad and Raditz get here." "Take the Dragon Ball with you," Muri instructed, his voice carrying the weight of authority and concern. He looked over at a young Namekian boy who stood with a serious expression. Dende, you will guide these warriors to Guru's place. Make sure they arrive safely. The boy, Dende, nodded quickly. Yes, Elder, he replied, stepping forward with a hint of nervousness but determination in his eyes. Bulma, her eyes glued to the dragon radar, spoke up. Make sure you find a place to hide the Dragon Ball along the way. If they're using scouters to track it, they'll struggle to locate it as long as it's not in a village. Bardock crossed his arms and nodded. Got it. I'll be back as soon as I can, he said, his eyes narrowing with determination. Krillin, who had been silently thinking, suddenly spoke up. Wait, Bardock, take your mom with you. If we fail here, at least they won't get their hands on the dragon radar. Tien added in agreement. Yeah, it'll be safer with Guru than staying here. Bardock hesitated for a moment, but then glanced over at Bulma, who was already gearing up to leave. Fine, but make sure you guys hold them off. Krillin turned back to Mori, a serious look on his face. You and your people should evacuate this area. It's too dangerous to stay here. Mori's eyes darkened with worry. They'll just keep hunting us down until they get the Dragon Ball, he replied, voice low. Krillin smiled slightly, an idea forming in his mind. Exactly, he said. That's why Bardock should leave the Dragon Ball here, for now. Dende looked confused and glanced at Krillin. But what if they find it? Krillin shook his head. Bardock and Dende will just make sure to get the Dragon Ball from Guru and hide it. We'll deal with this one. Bardock's eyes flicked between Krillin and the elder Namekian, but there was no time to debate. All right, he said at last. Let's move. Meanwhile, far away from the village, Captain Ginyu stood in the middle of a demolished Namekian settlement, a smirk tugging at his lips. He admired the trail of destruction they had left behind. This was the 5th village they'd torn apart, and they had claimed a Dragon Ball from each one. His scouter beeped, and he tapped it. Captain Ginyu, he answered. A familiar voice crackled through the device, icy and commanding. Captain Ginyu, Frieza's voice echoed. How goes my Dragon Ball hunt? Very well, Lord Frieza, Ginyu replied with pride. We have already collected 5 Dragon Balls, and we've captured Vegeta as you requested. Excellent, Frieza purred, satisfaction dripping from his words. I will be landing shortly. Bring me my 5 Dragon Balls and the prisoner. The remaining 2 should pose no problem for your men. As you wish, my lord, Ginyu said, ending the transmission with a grin. He looked around at his squad. You heard the boss. Let's move. Back at the village, Krillin and Tien lay flat on their stomachs at the edge of a cliff, overlooking the Namekian homes. Both had their power levels suppressed to near zero, the air tense with the knowledge of what was coming. They're getting close, Krillin muttered under his breath, his eyes squinting as he focused on the distant energy signatures. I can feel them too, Tien replied, but it feels like only a few of them are heading this way. Krillin let out a small sigh of relief. Good, I didn't want to face them all at once anyway. Tien glanced over at him. Even so, if we don't take out their scouters, this plan's not going to work, he reminded him. They'll track us down. Krillin nodded, his face serious. We'll just have to do our best. Keep your power level low, and we'll hit them with surprise on our side. Both warriors braced themselves, knowing what was at stake. As Bardock, Bulma, and Dende traveled, they arrived at a tall spire, a strange house standing at its peak. The landscape spread out far below them, offering a stunning view of the surrounding area. Bulma took a deep breath and looked around. Wow, the view from here is incredible, she said, trying to lighten the mood despite the tension of their mission. Bardock wasn't interested in the scenery. His eyes were fixed on the strange building. So this is Guru's place? He asked, glancing down at Dende. Dende nodded, though his voice was quieter now. Yes, this is where Guru lives. Bulma noticed the boy's unease and smiled gently. Don't worry, kid. Krillin and Tien will do everything they can to protect your village. Just then, a figure emerged from the house, a tall, muscular Namekian with a stern expression. His presence was commanding, radiating strength and confidence. Who are you? The Namekian demanded, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the group. Nail! Dende called, running up to the warrior. It's me, Dende. Nail relaxed slightly, though his gaze remained sharp. Dende, what are you doing here? He asked. We came to ask for your help, Dende explained, looking up at him. Our village is under attack. People are dying. Nail's expression hardened. You know I have to stay here and protect Guru, he said, his voice firm. But Nail, Dende pleaded, our people will die if we don't do something. Nail hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the house. Finally, he nodded. I will take you to speak with Guru, he said, but I cannot leave his side. He turned and led them inside the house. As they entered, Bardock and Bulma's eyes widened. The room was small, but dominated by the presence of the largest Namekian they had ever seen. Guru sat on a throne, his immense figure towering over the others, his skin wrinkled with age and wisdom. You have come for the Dragon Ball, Guru said, his deep voice resonating through the room. Yes, Bulma confirmed, her eyes locked on the elder Namekian. We need to hide it from the evil ones, so they don't use it to make their wish. Guru's ancient eyes shifted from Bulma to Bardock. You also have a wish, he said, his deep voice filling the room. Bardock nodded. We do, he said solemnly. We want to wish back some of our friends who were killed. Guru sat in silence for a moment, considering their request. Very well, he said at last. Your motives are pure. You may take the Dragon Ball. Bardock gave a respectful bow. Thank you, sir, he said, grateful. Guru's gaze fell on Bardock, his expression changing as he leaned forward slightly. Now, step forward, boy, he instructed, his tone filled with a deeper meaning. Bardock hesitated for a moment, unsure of what Guru was about to do, but then stepped up, standing before the towering Namekian elder. Guru reached out a massive hand and gently placed it on Bardock's head, his fingers glowing faintly. You have great potential within you, Guru said, his voice soft but firm. Let's see if I can unlock some of it. Bardock's body stiffened as he felt a surge of energy coursing through him. His aura flared wildly, the power swelling inside his veins like a flood. He gasped, feeling stronger, faster, alive in a way he had never felt before. Whoa! Bardock exclaimed, clenching his fists as his power pulsed through him. His excitement quickly turned serious. I feel incredible, but we need to get back and help Krillin and Tien. They're fighting for their lives. Guru lifted a hand, motioning for patience. Wait, he said calmly. Dende, step forward. The young Namekian, looking both curious and a bit nervous, stepped up beside Bardock. Guru's gentle eyes fell on Denda. You are not a fighter, he said, his voice filled with warmth, but your talents lie elsewhere. He placed his hand on Dende's head, much like he had done with Bardock. A faint glow surrounded the boy, briefly lighting up the room before fading away. Denda blinked as the aura disappeared. What did you do? He asked softly. You possess the gift of healing, Guru said. I have unlocked this ability for you. Dende's eyes widened with wonder. Healing? He asked. Guru nodded. Yes, you can now use your power to heal others. It is a rare gift. Bardock looked over at Denda, impressed. That'll be useful. We'll need every bit of help we can get. Guru's gaze then shifted to Bulma. Now, step forward, young lady. Bulma looked startled, taking a step back. Me? But I'm not a fighter. I don't have any magic powers, she said, shaking her head slightly. Guru smiled kindly. But you do have gifts, he said, and I can unlock some of your hidden potential as well. With a deep breath, Bulma stepped forward and stood before Guru. She hesitated for only a second before allowing the giant Namekian to place his hand on her head. The same soft glow that had surrounded Bardock and Dende enveloped her. When Guru removed his hand, Bulma stood still for a moment, her eyes wide with realization. Thoughts swirled in her mind, ideas and solutions to problems she hadn't even thought of in years, all becoming clear in an instant. She felt like she could solve 100 different problems at once. Wow, she murmured, barely able to contain her shock. Far away, Captain Ginyu touched down outside of Frieza's massive spaceship, the 5 Dragon Balls floating behind him. Over his shoulder, he carried an unconscious Vegeta like a rag doll, the once proud Saiyan now reduced to a prisoner. One of Frieza's henchmen stood waiting, his face emotionless. Lord Frieza is very pleased with your progress, the henchman said. He's waiting for you in the throne room. Good, Ginyu replied, tossing Vegeta toward the soldier like he was garbage. Get this weakling out of my sight. The henchman caught Vegeta and nodded. I'll place him in a healing chamber immediately. Lord Frieza intends to interrogate him personally. At that, Ginyu flinched ever so slightly. Even he, despite his loyalty and strength, had to admit that the thought of Frieza's personal interrogations made him uneasy. Meanwhile, Jis, Birder, Rikum, and Guldo of the Ginyu force landed in yet another small Namekian village. The quiet huts and peaceful surroundings were in stark contrast to the destruction that was about to unfold. All right, Jis, the fiery-haired second-in-command, said as he surveyed the village with a smirk. Let's get the next Dragon Ball. I suppose we should ask nicely first. Berter, the tall, blue-skinned speedster, said with a sarcastic tone. Jees scoffed, rolling his eyes. Yeah, because that's worked out so well with the other villages, he said, clearly unimpressed. Rakum, the largest of the group, stretched lazily. I'm getting tired of all this talking. Let's just destroy everything and find the Dragon Ball already. It's more fun that way, he said with a chuckle. Their conversation was interrupted by a defiant voice. You won't take our Dragon Ball, Elder Mori said, stepping forward, his voice calm but firm. We know you're up to no good. Jees raised an eyebrow, his smile returning. Doesn't matter what you think, he said casually, flipping his long hair back. We're taking it, whether you like it or not. From behind Mori, a tall Namekian warrior stepped forward, 2 other fighters flanking him. No, you're not, the warrior said coldly, narrowing his eyes at the invaders. Without hesitation, the 3 Namekian warriors charged their energy and fired a series of blasts directly at the Ginyu force, each aiming for their scouters. Guldo and Rakum weren't quick enough, and their scouters exploded in a flash, shards of the devices flying in all directions. Berter, on the other hand, swatted the incoming blast aside with a lazy flick of his hand, unharmed. Jees glanced at the smoking remains of his comrades' scouters, his eyes narrowing. Well, this just got interesting. Nice try, Jees sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. His body blurred, phasing out of sight as he moved faster than the Namekian warriors could react. In an instant, Jees's fist pierced through the chest of one of the warriors, and the Namekian fell lifelessly to the ground. Another warrior found himself face to face with Berter, the towering blue fighter. Berter, quicker than a blink, rammed his fist through the Namekian's stomach, his expression barely changing as the warrior collapsed at his feet. Rakum, towering above the last Namekian, smirked darkly. Without a word, he gripped the warrior's head in his massive hands. A sickening crunch echoed through the air as he squeezed, crushing the Namekian's skull, sending a purple mess spilling onto the ground. Above them, Krillin watched in horror from the cliffside. The battle below had ended so quickly, far quicker than he'd anticipated. The Namekians hadn't even stood a chance. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. If they didn't act fast, more lives would be lost. We have to do something now, Krillin muttered, his mind racing. He turned to Tien. Take the Dragon Ball and go hide. Lower your power as much as possible. Tien's eyes narrowed. And what about you? He asked, his voice laced with concern. Krillin took a deep breath, steeling himself. I'm going to draw them away from the village. Then I'll try to lose them and hide, he said, determination in his voice. Without waiting for a reply, Krillin's body flared with energy, his red aura glowing brightly as he shouted, Kaioken X3. Without hesitation, Krillin shot down toward the village, landing between the Ginyu force and the surviving Namekians. His aura crackled around him as he faced the invaders. The Dragon Ball isn't here, Krillin blurted out. I already hit it. Jees raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Did you now? He asked with a sly grin. Maybe we should play with you a bit, see if you're willing to tell us where it is. Guldo's eyes gleamed with excitement. Can I handle this one? He asked, stepping forward eagerly. Jees shrugged. You sure you're up for it? He might not be as weak as he looks. Guldo chuckled. Oh, I'm sure. This guy looks like a pushover. Krillin didn't wait for more banter. You'll have to catch me first, he taunted, blasting off into the air in the opposite direction. Before he could get far, Guldo appeared right in front of him, his fist connecting hard with Krillin's face. Krillin skidded back, surprised by the speed of the blow, but barely fazed. How did you move so fast? Krillin muttered, shaking off the hit. Guldo grinned, enjoying Krillin's confusion. I can freeze time, he said with a smug laugh. Krillin started, but his words were cut off as Guldo's fist slammed into his stomach. The attack came out of nowhere, and Krillin hadn't even seen him move. Krillin grimaced, quickly raising a hand above his head. Destructo Disc, he yelled, forming a razor-sharp disc of energy in his palm and hurling it at Guldo. The attack whizzed through the air, but Guldo vanished, only to reappear behind Krillin in the blink of an eye. Another punch connected with Krillin's back, sending him stumbling forward. He whipped around, feeling frustration building. How is he so fast? With Kaioken X3, Krillin should have been running circles around this guy. Krillin launched a quick elbow backward, but hit nothing but air. Guldo had already moved, landing a swift kick to Krillin's face. The blow wasn't strong, but it was annoying enough to throw Krillin off. Krillin quickly adjusted, throwing a punch of his own. This time, Guldo wasn't fast enough to avoid it. The hit landed squarely in his stomach, and Guldo's eyes widened as the breath was knocked out of him. Seeing an opening, Krillin pressed forward, landing blow after blow. Guldo stumbled back, struggling to regain his balance. Without the ability to freeze time, he couldn't keep up with Krillin's speed. Guldo's breath came in ragged gasps. Without holding his breath to freeze time, he was completely outmatched. Another punch from Krillin slammed into his gut, leaving Guldo wheezing. Desperately, Guldo threw a wild punch, but it passed straight through one of Krillin's after images. Before Guldo could react, Krillin appeared behind him, cupping his hands to his side. "Kamehameha!" Krillin shouted, unleashing a powerful blue beam of energy that struck Guldo directly in the back. The force of the blast was too much for Guldo. The beam tore through his chest, disintegrating his heart and ending the fight instantly. Guldo's lifeless body crumpled to the ground. Jeese, watching the fight unfold, crossed his arms, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Not bad," he admitted. "You've got more fight in you than I expected." Recoome, who had been watching from the sidelines, grinned wide. "I want to fight him next," he said, cracking his knuckles. Jeese gave a casual wave. "All right, mate, he's all yours." Krillin narrowed his eyes, readying himself as the hulking Recoome lumbered toward him. The giant red-headed warrior cracked his knuckles and grinned. "You're going to die, little man," Recoome taunted, his deep voice booming like thunder. Krillin smirked, despite the tension tightening his muscles. "I'll pass on that," he said, his voice steady, masking the worry he felt. He knew this was going to be tough, but he had to stall them long enough for Tien to hide the Dragon Ball and for backup to arrive. Before Krillin could say anything else, Recoome's massive form lunged forward, moving with surprising speed for someone his size. His fist aimed directly at Krillin's face. Reacting just in time, Krillin's red aura flared as he pushed his Kaioken to X3, narrowly dodging the blow, but not quite fast enough. Recoome's punch glanced his face, sending Krillin flying backward. Krillin twisted mid-air, rolling with the impact, and managed to flip back onto his feet. He wiped a trickle of blood from his lip, his heart racing. That guy hits like a truck, he thought, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. Keeping his Kaioken active, he dashed back toward Recoome, aiming a high-speed kick at the brute's head. Recoome barely flinched. Raising his thick arm, he blocked the kick effortlessly, his grin widening. Before Krillin could retreat, Recoome's knee shot up, aiming for his exposed back. Thinking fast, Krillin grabbed onto Recoome's arm and swung his leg downward, blocking the incoming knee strike with his foot. Using the momentum, Krillin launched his other knee upward, smashing it into Recoome's chin with a solid thud. Recoome stumbled back, surprise flickering in his eyes, as the force of the hit sent him flying into a nearby Namekian hut. The flimsy structure collapsed under his weight, burying him in rubble and dust. Krillin took a quick breath, his body aching from maintaining the Kaioken at such a high level. He wasn't sure how long he could keep this up, but for now, he had to stay focused. Meanwhile, Bardock soared through the skies, moving faster than he ever had before. The power Guru had unlocked within him surged through his veins, making him feel invincible. His senses were sharper, and he could feel 3 large energy signatures where Krillin and Tien were. Worry gnawed at him. He could still sense Krillin's energy, but Tien's had vanished, and that was a bad sign. "Hang in there, guys," he thought, pushing himself to go faster. As he flew, something below caught his eye. Movement. He descended quickly and saw a familiar figure running across the terrain. Tien sprinted across the rocky ground, his power level suppressed as low as possible to avoid detection. Flying would have been faster, but he knew it would make him a target for any scouter that picked him up. He had to be careful, especially with the Dragon Ball he was carrying. He could still sense Krillin's energy, burning bright and powerful. He's using the Kaioken, Tien thought, concern etching his face. But why hasn't he drawn them away from the village yet? Something wasn't right. Finding a suitable spot, Tien quickly dropped the Dragon Ball onto the ground, hiding it behind some large boulders. This should work for now, he thought, glancing back toward where Krillin was. He hesitated, torn between staying hidden and rushing back to help his friend. Suddenly, he felt a powerful energy approaching, but unlike the evil auras he'd sensed earlier, this one felt familiar. Tien turned just as the energy landed beside him, and his eyes widened in surprise. "Bardock?" Tien exclaimed, shocked at the sight of the young warrior, but more than that, he was stunned by the sheer power Bardock was radiating. How'd you get so strong? Bardock wasted no time to explain, he said quickly, his tone urgent. You need to take the Dragon Ball you have and head the way I came. Guru's place isn't far. Where's Guru's place? Tien asked, still processing the sudden appearance of Bardock. It's a Namekian house on top of a giant pillar. You can't miss it, Bardock explained hurriedly. My mom's waiting there with another Dragon Ball. Guru can help you get stronger, fast. Is that how you got this strong? Tien asked, his eyes narrowing as he tried to gauge just how much Bardock's power had grown. Yeah, Bardock confirmed with a sharp nod. But I don't have time to talk. Krillin needs help, and I'm going to back him up. Without waiting for a response, Bardock blasted into the air, speeding toward the battle where Krillin was facing the Ginyu Force. Tien watched him go, still amazed at the power Bardock had gained, but he knew there was no time to waste. He had to get to Guru's place and unlock his own potential if they had any hope of winning this fight. With a determined look, Tien took off, heading in the direction Bardock had pointed him. Recoom's massive body erupted in a blinding surge of energy, blasting the remains of the Namekian house into pieces. Debris flew everywhere, and Namekian civilians cowered in fear as they watched the terrifying display of power. But Krillin, despite the chaos around him, stayed calm, his focus razor sharp. Maybe I can take him, Krillin thought, his confidence growing as he sized up the Ginyu Force brute. So far, the other members of the squad seemed content to watch from the sidelines. That was his only advantage. If all three jumped in, he knew he wouldn't stand a chance. Recoom's furious roar snapped Krillin out of his thoughts. The massive warrior charged again, his feet thundering against the ground. Krillin quickly powered up, pushing his Kaioken to X3. His red aura flared brightly as he sprinted forward to meet Recoom head-on. Recoom was the first to strike, swinging a heavy fist aimed at Krillin's midsection. Krillin ducked low, just barely avoiding the blow. He darted inside, getting close enough to attack, where Recoom's large frame couldn't fight comfortably. Krillin launched a flurry of rapid jabs at Recoom's stomach, his fists connecting solidly. But despite the punches landing, they didn't seem to do much damage. Recoom barely flinched, though he did backpedal slightly, trying to create some distance between them. This is my chance, Krillin thought. He leaped back, raising one hand into the air. His fingers sparked as he gathered energy in his palm, forming a glowing ball of light. The ball quickly condensed, flattening into a razor-thin disc. Destructo Disc! Krillin shouted, hurling the spinning energy attack straight at Recoom, who was only a few feet away. Recoom's eyes widened slightly as the disc zipped toward him, spinning wildly. He knew he didn't have time to dodge at such close range, but he didn't seem worried. Huh, you think that little disc can— He raised his hands to block, but the Destructo Disc sliced clean through his arms like they were paper, severing them at the wrist. Recoom's confident smirk faded, replaced by shock as the disc continued its deadly path, cutting clean through his shoulders and chest. The massive alien barely had time to register what had happened before his body split in half. The top part of Recoom's body toppled forward, his lifeless face still frozen in an expression of disbelief as both halves of him hit the ground with a heavy thud. Recoom! G shouted in alarm, his usual cocky demeanor gone. He stared at his fallen teammate, his eyes wide with disbelief. How did that little guy manage this? G thought as he gritted his teeth. His gaze snapped to Krillin, and his expression turned into one of cold anger. You're a lot more skilled than we gave you credit for, G growled, but playtime's over. G glanced over at Berter and gave a quick nod. Let's finish this. Krillin's stomach sank as the two warriors charged at him in perfect synchronization. This is bad, he muttered under his breath. He had no time to think, no time to plan. He had to react. Kyoken X5, he screamed, pushing his body even further. His red aura flared up violently, his power spiking. Just as Jce's punch came hurtling toward him, Krillin managed to leap out of the way, but Berter was already there. The blue-skinned warrior's foot crashed into Krillin's side with brutal force, sending him flying across the village. He crashed into the ground, his aura flickering, almost completely gone. Jce and Berter didn't give him a second to recover. They were relentless, charging straight at him to press their advantage. Krillin groaned in pain, trying to pull himself to his feet. I don't know how much more of this I can take, he thought, panic rising in his chest. He looked up just in time to see Berter closing in fast. Krillin clenched his fists. He didn't have a choice. Kaioken X7, Krillin roared, his body screaming in protest as his aura exploded around him like wildfire. The strain was unbearable, but he couldn't stop now. He had to keep fighting. Burter's fist swung down, but Krillin blocked it with a quick strike of his arm, then countered with a sharp kick to Burter's ribs. The blow sent Burter flying backward, crashing into a nearby rock formation. But Krillin didn't have time to celebrate. Jeese was on him in an instant, his red hair flying as he unleashed a barrage of kicks and punches, each one faster than the last. "Why won't you just die?" Jeese shouted, his frustration boiling over, as Krillin spun and dodged with surprising speed, blocking the attacks with ease despite the overwhelming pressure. Krillin grit his teeth, feeling the immense strain on his body from maintaining the Kaioken X7. He knew he was running on borrowed time, but he had no choice. Every muscle in his body screamed in agony, but he had to hold out, at least until help arrived. Krillin barely had a moment to breathe before he sensed another attack coming from behind. Burter's massive fist sailed through the air, aiming to flatten him, but Krillin had already moved. The punch hit only an afterimage and slammed directly into Jeese's side instead. "Watch it, Burter!" Jeese yelled in frustration, staggering from the blow. But Krillin wasn't wasting any time. He appeared behind Burter, bringing both hands down in a crushing double axe handle. The blow landed squarely on Burter's head, sending the tall blue warrior crashing into the ground below, forming a massive crater. With Burter temporarily out of the fight, Krillin turned his attention to Jeese. His red Kaioken aura flared again, though it was flickering slightly now. He knew his body couldn't handle much more, and every muscle screamed in protest. But he didn't have a choice. He had to finish this fast. He shot toward Jeese, unleashing a fierce combination of kicks and punches, each strike aimed to do maximum damage. Jeese grimaced, raising his arms to block the onslaught. But Krillin's attacks came too fast, and Jeese couldn't block them all. Blow after blow landed, each one pushing the red-haired warrior back. "Damn it, Burter, get up already," Jeese thought, gritting his teeth as Krillin's fist came barreling toward him again. Just as Krillin's punch was about to land, it slowed dramatically. The red aura surrounding him faded, and his speed plummeted. "No," Krillin thought, panic rising in his chest. "The Kaioken! I can't hold it anymore." His body had finally reached its limit. Jeese saw his chance. With a wicked grin, he lashed out, landing a hard punch right in Krillin's stomach, sending the Earthling reeling. "You're finished now," Jeese growled, taking out his frustration with every punch, each one hitting harder than the last. After a brutal punch to the face, Krillin was sent flying back through the air, blood dripping from his mouth. But before Krillin could even hit the ground, Burter was back on his feet. He shot forward and caught Krillin mid-air, locking him in a crushing bear hug. "Now what should we do with you?" Burter asked, tightening his grip as Krillin gasped for breath. "I say we crush him," Jeese said, rubbing his jaw where Krillin had landed several punches earlier. "I'm up for that," Burter said with a grin, squeezing even harder, causing Krillin to cry out in pain. Just when it seemed like Krillin had no way out, a voice called from above, "I say you let him go." Both Jeese and Burter looked up, surprised. Floating above them was a small boy with blue hair, dressed in a green fighting outfit with a black undershirt. A sword was strapped to his back, gleaming in the sunlight. Jeese raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "And what makes you think you're in a position to have a say, kid?" he sneered. Bardock didn't respond with the words. Instead, he charged, his sword flashing in a deadly arc as he swung it at Jeese. Jeese's confidence faltered. He hadn't expected the boy to attack so aggressively, and he struggled to dodge the rapid strikes. Each swing of Bardock's sword came dangerously close, forcing Jeese to retreat, his mind racing. This kid is better than I thought. Deciding he had to create some distance, Jeese gathered energy in his hands and fired a series of blasts at Bardock, hoping to slow him down. Bardock pushed forward, charging straight into Jeese's barrage of energy blasts. The air crackled with heat as the blasts exploded around him. But Bardock wasn't slowing down. He knew he couldn't afford a drawn-out battle. Both Jeese and Burter were stronger than him, and the longer this fight went, the more dangerous it would get. "I've got to finish this now," Bardock thought, his mind racing. He needed a plan, and fast. His sword had caught Jeese off guard, but that advantage wouldn't last long. Then an idea hit him. Risky, but it could work. "I'll use the Kaioken, just like Krillin taught me." "Kaioken X2!" Bardock yelled, focusing all his energy into boosting his power. His body ignited with a brilliant red aura, his strength and speed doubling in an instant. He felt the familiar surge of energy rushing through him. But something was different this time. The Kaioken felt easier to manage, smoother, as if his body had already adapted to it. Maybe Guru unlocking my potential really helped, Bardock thought, briefly wondering how much stronger he'd become. Without wasting any time, Bardock charged at Geese, swinging his sword with lightning speed. Geese barely had time to react as the blade sliced clean through his shoulder, severing one of his arms. The red-skinned warrior howled in pain, stumbling back, but Bardock wasn't done. He reversed his swing, bringing the blade upward with brutal precision, cutting Geese diagonally from his hip to his shoulder. The alien's body collapsed in two halves, joining Riku in a lifeless heap on the battlefield. Bardock froze for a moment, staring at what he'd done. His chest heaved as he caught his breath, the reality of the situation hitting him. He had just killed someone. His hands trembled slightly as he realized that for the first time, he'd taken another being's life. He'd been in fights before, life and death struggles, but never had he dealt the killing blow himself. A vague memory of his father using Krillin's Destructo Disc to finish off Zarbon flashed in his mind. But back then, he'd been in his Uzaru form and barely remembered the details. This is different, Bardock thought, his stomach twisting. He knew it was a life or death situation, his or Geese's, but that didn't make it easier to accept. His thoughts were interrupted when he saw Berter, still holding Krillin by the head, squeezing tightly. "Don't move, kid," Berter growled, his deep voice rumbling with menace. "You wouldn't want me to squeeze too hard and spread your friend's brains all over the battlefield, would you?" Bardock clenched his fist, his body tense. He was faced with a choice again. Stop Berter, but at what cost? He didn't want to kill again, but Krillin's life was in danger. "Let him go," Bardock warned, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. Berter smirked, showing no fear. "Or what?" he taunted, tightening his grip slightly, causing Krillin to wince in pain. "Or I'll stop you," Bardock said, stepping forward, his eyes narrowed. Berter considered this for a moment, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "I'll drop him if you drop the sword," Berter suggested. "We can finish this one-on-one, no weapons, just you and me." Bardock hesitated. He didn't trust Berter, but Krillin's life was on the line. After a brief pause, he nodded. Agreed. He held the sword out, letting it fall to the ground with a soft thud. True to his word, Berter tossed Krillin aside like a ragdoll. Krillin hit the ground hard, but immediately started crawling away, clutching his ribs. Berter cracked his neck and took on a fighting stance. "Now, let's see what you've got, kid," he said, his tone dripping with overconfidence. Bardock mirrored his stance, mentally preparing himself. Without his sword, this would be more of an even fight, but he still had the Kaioken. The real question was whether he could control it long enough to win. Far across the battlefield, inside Frieza's ship, Captain Ginyu's scouter beeped furiously. He frowned, glancing at the screen. "Power level of 100,000, he muttered in disbelief. Frieza, seated on his throne, raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Who could that be?" the tyrant asked, his voice calm yet curious. "I'm not sure," Ginyu replied, eyes scanning the scouter's readings. "But Riku and Geese just vanished off the radar. Their power levels are gone." Frieza's expression darkened. "I see. Go investigate and deal with whoever did this," he ordered coolly, his tone brooking no argument. Ginyu saluted. "Yes, Lord Frieza." Then, hesitating for a moment, he added, "What about Vegeta? If he heals, I doubt Kui will be enough to stop him." Frieza chuckled, an icy smile spreading across his face. "Oh, don't worry about Vegeta," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I'll handle him personally." Vegeta's eyes snapped open inside the healing tank, his vision blurry at first, but quickly sharpening. The liquid that surrounded him was soothing, but it couldn't mask the surge of power he felt coursing through his veins. His whole body hummed with energy. The near-death experiences on Earth and the brutal beating from Captain Ginyu had triggered yet another incredible boost in strength. He clenched his fist, feeling the raw potential he now had. He grinned to himself. "This is it," Vegeta thought. "I've become stronger than ever." Before he could revel in his newfound power any longer, muffled voices from outside the tank interrupted his thoughts. "Damn it, Vegeta, wake up already." It was Kui, grumbling as he stood guard over the healing pod. Vegeta's grin faded, replaced by a scowl. He gathered energy into his hand, and with a simple thought, he unleashed a blast inside the pod. The energy beam shattered the tank, sending liquid and shards of glass everywhere as the pressure exploded outward. "What the?" Kui started, spinning around in shock, but he never got the chance to finish his sentence. Vegeta's second blast was already heading his way, vaporizing him on the spot. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning flesh and smoke, but Vegeta didn't care. Kui was nothing to him. Vegeta stepped out of the remains of the healing tank, shaking off the liquid that clung to him. His eyes glowed with determination. "Now," he muttered to himself, "where did Frieza put those Dragon Balls?" Just as he was about to storm out of the room, a cold, terrifying voice echoed from behind him. "Why don't you ask me yourself?" Vegeta's blood ran cold as he turned slowly. Standing in the doorway, bathed in shadow but with a sinister smile spread across his face, was Frieza. "Frieza!" Vegeta stammered, his mind racing. He wasn't ready to face him yet. Not here, not now. The tyrant stepped forward, his tail swaying slowly behind him as his crimson eyes locked onto Vegeta. "I've been waiting for you to wake up, Vegeta," Frieza said, his voice dripping with malice. He gave a small, unsettling chuckle, sending a chill down Vegeta's spine. Bardock darted towards Burter at top speed, his fist aimed straight at the towering blue warrior's face. Burter, with lightning-fast reflexes, raised his arm and intercepted the blow just before it could land. Their muscles tensed as they locked in that moment, the air around them crackling with energy. Burter quickly followed up by thrusting his knee towards Bardock's midsection, hoping to land a devastating strike. But Bardock was faster than Burter anticipated. He swiftly brought his hands down, blocking the knee just in time. His arms trembled as he struggled to hold back Burter's force, a groan escaping his lips. It was clear that the blue alien was stronger than he appeared. Seeing an opening while Bardock's arms were occupied, Burter swung his other fist in a wide arc, aiming for Bardock's head, a blow that could knock him out cold. But Bardock was always one step ahead. Sensing the danger, he flipped backward, narrowly escaping what would have been a bone-shattering punch. He landed a few feet away, his body tensing, as he quickly powered up to put some distance between them. "You're fast, but not fast enough," Burter taunted, a confident grin spreading across his face as he rushed forward again, not giving Bardock any room to rest. He unleashed a relentless barrage of punches and kicks, each one blurring through the air as he pressed Bardock, trying to break through his defenses. Bardock dodged and blocked as best he could, but Burter's attacks were coming in too fast. "I need to find an opening," Bardock thought, his eyes darting for any weakness in Burter's approach, but so far, the blue giant wasn't giving him much to work with. Debzi. Meanwhile, Tien touched down just outside Guru's house, the heavy weight of the Dragon Ball in his hand. He stepped inside, the atmosphere immediately calming him, despite the urgency of the situation. "Bulma," he said, spotting her among the Namekians inside the peaceful home. Bulma turned around, a smile of relief crossing her face. "Tien, glad to see you made it. I see you've brought the Dragon Ball." "Yeah," Tien replied, a small nod following. "Bardock thought it'd be best to bring it here to you." Bulma's expression grew serious. "Good call. We've got the other one right here." She pointed to the glowing sphere on the table next to her. Tien wasn't in the mood for small talk, not with the stakes as high as they were. He quickly got to the point. "How did Bardock get so powerful all of a sudden?" he asked, genuinely curious. The Bardock he remembered wasn't this strong. "It was Guru," a voice answered from the other side of the room. Tien turned to see Nail, the stoic Namekian warrior, standing with his arms crossed. He unlocked some of Bardock's hidden potential. Unlocked? Tien raised an eyebrow, not entirely sure what Nail meant. What does that even mean? "You'll understand soon," a deep voice rumbled. It was Guru, the elder of the Namekians, his enormous form resting in the center of the room. His wise eyes locked onto Tien. "Come forward," he said, motioning with a slow hand. Without hesitation, Tien stepped closer to the elder, curiosity burning inside him. Guru placed his massive hand on Tien's head, his eyes narrowing in concentration. After a few moments of silence, Guru spoke again, his voice calm yet firm. "You do not possess the same raw power that your Saiyan friend holds," he said bluntly, "but there is hidden strength within you, and I will help you access it." As Guru focused, a white glow began to swirl around Tien, growing brighter with each passing second. Tien could feel the power surging within him, rushing through his body like a raging river. It was overwhelming. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the glow faded. Stepping back, Tien took a deep breath, his eyes wide in amazement. This is incredible, he said, flexing his hands as he felt the new power coursing through his veins. He looked over to Bulma, his expression determined. I'm going to help Bardock. I can't let him fight alone. Dibsy. At the same time, Vegeta stood frozen in place, staring in pure horror at the one being he feared above all others, Lord Frieza. Even after unlocking new levels of power within himself, he knew he still wasn't anywhere near strong enough to face the tyrant. The sight of Frieza standing there, calm yet radiating an aura of menace, sent a chill down Vegeta's spine. Frieza's voice broke through the tension, his tone dripping with mockery. Ah, Vegeta, he purred, his lips curling into a sinister smile. You look shocked. Did you honestly think you could steal my Dragon Balls without me noticing? How disappointing. Before Vegeta could muster a response, Frieza's fist shot out, faster than Vegeta could react. The blow landed square in his stomach with a sickening thud, driving the air from Vegeta's lungs and sending blood spraying from his mouth. Vegeta doubled over in pain, clutching his stomach as the shock of the hit washed over him. But Frieza wasn't done. With a savage grin, he brought his elbow down hard on Vegeta's face, shattering the prince's nose in an instant. The sane prince reeled from the impact, his vision blurring from the pain. Now, Frieza said, his voice calm as ever, I believe you have some information I want. Where are your little friends hiding? Vegeta gritted his teeth, trying to steady his breathing. I work alone, he spat, refusing to show weakness, even as blood dripped from his broken nose. Frieza chuckled darkly. Oh, come now, Vegeta. You and I both know that you didn't take out all of my men by yourself. You've had help. His tail lashed out, slamming into Vegeta's face with brutal force, sending him crashing to the ground. Vegeta's ribs cracked under the pressure of Frieza's next punch, the sharp pain shooting through his body as he gasped for air. How can he still be this strong? Bardock barely managed to block as Burter's powerful leg shot towards his head, the force behind the kick making his arms tremble. He had been fighting the Blue Giant for what felt like hours, but despite his best efforts, he hadn't landed any serious blows. Each attack he threw either missed or was effortlessly blocked by Burter. I need to do something or I'll be finished soon, he thought to himself, breathing heavily as the relentless assault continued. His body still ached from the last time he used the Kaioken to take down G's. The strain had left him feeling numb, but Bardock knew if he wanted any chance of survival, he'd have to risk using it again. Kaioken, ×2, Bardock roared, his voice echoing across the Namekian plains. Instantly, his body exploded with a fiery red aura, the energy swirling around him as his power doubled. With his newfound strength, Bardock shot forward, his fist connecting squarely with Burter's chin. The impact was crushing, and the Ginyu warrior was sent hurtling into the sky, spinning out of control from the sheer force of the punch. Bardock didn't waste a second. Channeling his energy, he shot after Burter, appearing in the air above him with blinding speed. This ends now, Bardock shouted, bringing both his fists down in a hammer-like motion on the blue warrior's head. Burter plummeted toward the ground like a meteor, slamming into the Namekian soil with enough force to create a massive crater. For a moment, the battlefield was silent, dust and debris floating in the air. Bardock hovered above, breathing heavily, hoping that he had finally done enough to put Burter down. But as the dust began to clear, his eyes widened in disbelief. Burter stood up, battered but still standing strong in the center of the crater. His armor was cracked, bruises lined his muscular blue frame, and a small trickle of blood ran from his mouth, but he was otherwise unharmed. Not bad, kid, Burter said, wiping the blood away with the back of his hand. But it'll take more than that to finish me. Before Bardock could react, Burter shot back up at him, moving faster than before. A flurry of punches and kicks rained down on the young Saiyajin, each strike faster and more brutal than the last. Bardock, still trying to conserve energy, had dropped the Kaioken, and now he was barely managing to block Burter's onslaught. With each blow, his defense grew weaker, and Burter's attacks only seemed to grow stronger. Finally, Burter broke through Bardock's guard. A vicious punch crashed into Bardock's diaphragm, knocking the wind out of him. Bardock gasped, his body doubling over from the force of the blow, blood spurting from his mouth. But Burter wasn't done. While Bardock was still struggling to catch his breath, Burter's knee came up in a brutal arc, smashing into Bardock's face with sickening force. Bardock's vision blurred as pain exploded in his skull. Unable to maintain his focus, he fell from the sky, crashing into the ground with a thud. Dazed, he barely had time to recover before Burter followed up, diving down at full speed. The blue giant's fist connected with Bardock's temple, sending him skidding across the dirt, his body tumbling like a rag doll. "Crusher Cannon!" Burter shouted, his voice filled with fury. A massive ball of blue energy formed in his hand, crackling with deadly power. Without hesitation, Burter hurled the energy blast directly at Bardock, aiming to finish him off once and for all. Bardock looked up through blurry eyes, his head spinning. "I have to move." The energy blast was coming straight for him, and he had no time to dodge. With no other options, Bardock forced himself to stand. "Kaioken, ×2!" he screamed, his body once again erupting in that familiar red aura. The power surge doubled his strength, but it came at a cost. His muscles screamed in agony, and his vision wavered from the strain. Still disoriented, Bardock couldn't hold the Kaioken for more than a few seconds. His knees buckled, and the aura flickered out. The power vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him vulnerable. Bardock's heart pounded in his chest as Burter's Crusher Cannon closed in. "There's no way I can dodge this," he thought, bracing himself for the impact. With no other choice, Bardock crossed his arms over his chest and dug his feet into the ground, preparing to take the blast head on. The Crusher Cannon hit with a thunderous explosion, pushing Bardock back as his arms trembled under the force. The blast engulfed him, the shockwave tearing through the battlefield and kicking up a cloud of dust. For a long moment, the area was silent, the smoke from the explosion hanging in the air. When it finally began to clear, Bardock was still standing, but barely. His body was covered in burns, his clothes torn to shreds, and his arms and legs were littered with bruises. Blood dripped from his face, and every inch of him ached. But somehow, he was still alive. Burter's eyes narrowed. "You're tougher than you look, kid," he sneered, already preparing another attack. His hand glowed as he charged up another Crusher Cannon, the energy swirling violently in his palm. "But it's over now. Time to die." "Crusher Cannon!" Burter roared, sending the deadly blue energy blast flying toward Bardock once again. Bardock's body tensed, bracing for the crushing impact of Burter's energy blast. He crossed his arms tightly over his chest, expecting the searing pain any second. But it never came. Confused, he looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. The Crusher Cannon had exploded far off in the distance, leaving only a faint trail of smoke in its wake. Standing between Bardock and Burter was Tien, his fierce three-eyed gaze locked on to the towering blue alien. "I'll handle this one," Tien said calmly, glancing back at Bardock with a reassuring nod. "You look like you could use a break." Bardock, breathing heavily and still reeling from his earlier battle, was too exhausted to argue. "Yeah, I won't stop you." Turning back to Burter, Tien's expression hardened. The air around him crackled with energy as he called out, "Kaioken, ×2!" Instantly, a bright red aura engulfed him, surging outward with incredible force. But Tien barely flinched under the power's strain. Before Burter could react, Tien shot forward like a blur, his fist slamming into Burter's gut with such force that the blue giant's eyes bulged, his mouth opening in shock. The blow bent Burter in half, driving the wind from his lungs with a pained grunt. Tien didn't let up. He spun, his foot snapping up and connecting with Burter's chin in a powerful kick, sending the Ginyu Force member flying into the sky. His body soared upward, barely visible against the clouds. Tien's gaze followed him, his face stern, as he raised his hands in front of him, shaping them into a triangular pattern. "Tri-beam! Ha!" Tien shouted, his voice echoing across the battlefield. A brilliant golden wave of energy exploded from his hands, cutting through the sky and slamming into Burter. The blue warrior didn't even have time to scream before the attack disintegrated him completely, leaving nothing but dust and fading energy in the air. Bardock, still catching his breath, slowly stood up, his legs shaky from the beating he had taken earlier. "Thanks," he said, walking up to Tien. He wiped some blood from his lip, his body still aching from the battle. "No problem," Tien replied with a small smile, his aura fading as he powered down from the Kaioken. "Looked like you needed a hand." Bardock nodded. "I thought I could handle the Kaioken, but it's more draining than I thought. I've never felt exhaustion like this before." "I get it," Tien said, stretching his arms. The Kaioken isn't easy to maintain. It takes a toll on your body if you're not careful. He turned his head, his expression suddenly serious as he sensed something in the distance. A massive energy source was heading their way, fast. Can you still fight? Tien asked, his eyes narrowing. Bardock clenched his fists, feeling the soreness in his muscles. I'll be fine, he said, determination hardening his voice. There was no way he was sitting out the next battle, no matter how banged up he was. DBZiz! Vegeta's body hit the ground hard, skidding across the rocky surface as another of Frieza's brutal punches sent him flying. His body was battered, his armor cracked, and blood dripped from his lip. Every inch of him was covered in cuts and bruises. The pain was overwhelming, but even more than the physical agony, Vegeta felt a crushing weight of despair settle over him. He hits too hard, Vegeta thought bitterly, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. Even with all my new strength, it's still not enough. I'm still no match for him. Frieza floated above him, looking down with a mixture of amusement and cruelty. His tail flicked lazily behind him, a mocking grin on his face. Is that all, Vegeta? Frieza taunted, his voice dripping with condescension. I expected more from the Prince of Saiyans. Vegeta's breath came in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he was going to die here, no matter how much power he had gained. It wasn't enough to defeat the monster standing before him. I should have known. There's no beating him. Frieza hovered lower, reaching out and grabbing Vegeta by the throat, lifting him effortlessly into the air. The Saiyan Prince struggled weakly, his vision swimming. Frieza's grip tightened, and Vegeta gasped for breath, the pressure on his windpipe unbearable. Now, Frieza said with a menacing calm, his eyes narrowing. I'll ask you one more time. Who killed Zarbone? Vegeta hesitated, pain shooting through his body as Frieza's grip tightened further. There's no point in lying, he realized grimly. He'll kill me either way. Kakarot? Vegeta rasped, his voice strained as he gasped for air. Frieza's eyes gleamed with a strange curiosity. Another sign, he said, more to himself than to Vegeta. He cocked his head, his tail swishing slowly behind him. Why didn't I hear about this one sooner? Vegeta coughed, trying to force words through his battered lungs. He was sent away as a child to wipe out a planet, right before you destroyed our people. Frieza's smile widened. Oh, so you do know about that, he mused, his tone almost playful. I suppose that explains why you've been acting so rebellious lately. I was wondering what had gotten into you, Vegeta. Vegeta's eyes widened slightly. You're not denying it? He asked, barely able to believe what he was hearing. Frieza wasn't even trying to hide his crimes anymore. Why would I? Frieza laughed, the sound cold and heartless. It's not like you'll be around long enough to tell anyone. Now will you? DB's Captain Ginyu landed softly on the battlefield, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust as he surveyed the area. The craters from the earlier fight dotted the ground, evidence of the fierce battles that had taken place. There was no sign of his team anywhere. Only Tien and Bardock stood before him. So, Ginyu said slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Tien, you're the one who killed my men. Tien didn't flinch. His posture was calm, but his gaze was firm. That's right, he said simply, bending the truth just a little. Letting Ginyu think he had taken out all of the Ginyu force alone might throw the captain off his game, maybe make him nervous. If Ginyu focused all his attention on him, Bardock might be able to find an opening. Ginyu's eyes flickered with something dangerous, but he didn't look surprised. Instead, he smiled darkly. Well, I'll give you one chance, he said, his voice low and smooth. Join me. Work under Lord Frieza and fight at my side. Together, we'll be unstoppable. Tien didn't hesitate, his answer firm and resolute. Never. He glanced briefly at Bardock, then back at Ginyu. We'll never work for Frieza. Well then, Captain Ginyu sneered, his purple-skinned face twisted in a menacing grin. I guess I'll have to kill you both. Without another word, Ginyu shot forward with alarming speed, his fist flying straight at Tien's face. The Triclops barely had a moment to react. Kaioken, ×2! Tien shouted, his body erupting with a fiery red aura as his power doubled. Despite the boost, Ginyu was still too fast. The purple warrior's fist crashed into Tien's cheek, sending him flying backward with devastating force, the ground shaking as Tien's body skidded across the dirt. Ginyu didn't waste a second. He launched himself at Tien again, throwing a barrage of kicks and punches as they both soared through the air. Tien moved his arms quickly, blocking as many of the hits as he could. But Ginyu's attacks were coming too fast, too relentless. For every punch Tien deflected, another 2 landed, each blow feeling like a sledgehammer slamming into him. From the ground, Bardock watched in horror as Tien was being overwhelmed by the fierce onslaught. He clenched his fists tightly, frustration boiling inside him. I can't just stand here and do nothing, he thought, his muscles tensing. His body still ached from the battle with Birder, but he'd had a few precious moments to recover. He could fight again. Kaioken, ×2! Bardock roared, his own red aura flaring up as he powered up, feeling the familiar rush of energy surge through him. Without hesitation, he shot toward Captain Ginyu, fists and feet flying at the back of the purple warrior's head. Sensing the attack, Ginyu spun around just in time, narrowly dodging Bardock's punch. "You're quick," Ginyu said with a smirk, his eyes gleaming with excitement. But not quick enough. He prepared to retaliate, but the momentary distraction had given Tien an opening. The Triclops quickly launched an attack of his own, throwing a powerful kick toward Ginyu's side. Ginyu managed to block the kick with his knee, but before he could counterattack, Bardock was on him again. Together, Tien and Bardock began attacking from both sides, forcing Ginyu on the defensive. The captain of the Ginyu force deflected and dodged as best he could, but the 2 warriors were relentless, their combined assault keeping him on his toes. Meanwhile, far from the battlefield, a sleek spaceship touched down on the surface of Namek. The hatch hissed open, and 2 figures stepped out, Kakarot and Raditz, the Saiyan brothers. Kakarot stretched his arms, yawning as he took in the sight of the alien planet. "So this is Namek," he said, looking around at the green landscape. The sky was a strange shade of turquoise, and the air felt heavy with the presence of power levels scattered across the planet. "Not much to look at," Raditz grumbled, crossing his arms as he scanned the horizon. "Too much green. I think I prefer your planet, Kakarot." Kakarot chuckled. "Yeah, I guess Earth's a bit easier on the eyes," but his face quickly grew serious. "Hold on, I can sense 2 battles happening right now." He furrowed his brow, focusing on the power levels. "One of them, there's a huge power to the east, and it's pounding on a smaller one. That must be Frieza." Raditz's expression darkened, "And it feels like the smaller one is Vegeta." Kakarot nodded grimly, but then his head snapped north. "There's another fight happening too. I can sense Tien and Bardock, but there's someone else with them, another strong power." "Are you sure?" Raditz asked, his eyebrows raising. "That can't be your son, right? Those power levels feel way too high for a kid." "It's him," Kakarot insisted. "I don't know how he got so strong, but it's Bardock. I can feel it." Raditz's eyes flicked toward the north, considering. "All right, I'll go help them out. You deal with Frieza and Vegeta." Kakarot glanced at his brother, his voice filled with determination. "Make sure no harm comes to my son, Raditz." Raditz smirked. "He seems to be doing all right for now. And after all that training you put me through with that 100 times gravity nonsense, I'll make sure that clown they're fighting, probably Captain Ginyu, won't be much of a challenge." Kakarot grinned, his confidence returning. "Good, let's finish this." Diesel. Back at the battlefield, Tien flew backward, his body reeling as Captain Ginyu's fist connected with his chin. He grunted in pain, his red Kaioken aura flickering as he struggled to stay in the fight. Ginyu's strength was overwhelming, but Tien refused to give in. As Tien staggered back, Ginyu turned his attention to Bardock, who was already launching another attack. The purple warrior ducked under Bardock's punch with ease, then countered with a brutal fist to the young Saiyan's stomach. The force of the punch knocked the wind out of Bardock, and the red aura around him flickered before fading entirely. Blood flew from Bardock's mouth as he doubled over, gasping for breath. Ginyu didn't hesitate. He raised both fists high and brought them down hard on Bardock's back, sending the boy crashing into the ground below, creating a crater on impact. Bardock lay at the bottom of the crater, groaning in pain, his body barely able to move. He tried to push himself up, but his arms shook from exhaustion. Ginyu hovered above, looking down at him with a smug grin. "Looks like you're done, kid," he taunted. But before he could descend and finish Bardock off, Tien was back in the fight, his red aura flaring as he charged at Ginyu with renewed determination. "Don't you ever quit!" Ginyu growled, annoyed at the persistent Triclops. He raised his arm to block Tien's attack, his sharp eyes locking onto his new opponent. "I'll admit, you've got spirit, but it's useless against me. Let's take this up a notch, Tien growled, steadying himself as his body radiated with a pulsing red glow. Sweat trickled down his brow, but he pushed down his fear, the thrill of battle igniting a fire within him. I really hope this doesn't kill me, he thought as he braced himself. Kaioken, X3, he roared, and his aura exploded outward, doubling in intensity. The ground trembled as his power soared past Captain Ginyu's. Without wasting a second, Tien charged forward, his speed nearly blinding. With a fierce cry, he drove his knee into Ginyu's stomach, forcing a strangled gasp from the purple-skinned warrior as he doubled over, clutching his midsection. But Tien didn't let up. He twisted his body, bringing his fist around in a powerful arc, aimed right for Ginyu's temple. Ginyu's eyes widened in shock, but he managed to raise his arm in the last possible instant, intercepting the crushing blow. His body wavered, and he gritted his teeth, feeling the raw power behind Tien's attack. But Tien was relentless. He launched another punch, his movements a blur. Just as his fist was about to land, Tien felt the strain of the Kaioken technique gnawing at his body. The red aura around him flickered, then faded, and his power plummeted. Seizing the opening, Ginyu's lips twisted into a malicious grin. He easily deflected Tien's punch and retaliated, his fist crashing into Tien's face with a resounding impact. Tien's body was hurled backward, slamming into the ground with a brutal force. Blood trickled from his mouth as he struggled to get back up. I'm through playing with you, Ginyu sneered, his eyes narrowing as he focused his energy. Pink light gathered in his hands, swirling and crackling with deadly power. He raised his hands, pointing them directly at Tien. Milky Cannon, he shouted, unleashing a spiraling wave of energy that roared toward the fallen warrior. Tien looked up, dazed, his body battered and bruised. His limbs felt like lead, and he knew he didn't have the strength to block the incoming attack. A sense of bitter resignation washed over him as he whispered, I failed. But just before the energy wave could hit him, a tall, imposing figure appeared, stepping directly between Tien and the oncoming blast. Tien's eyes widened as he took in the sight of Saiyan armor, dark as night, and a cascade of long, wild black hair, framing a stern, chiseled face. Tien couldn't believe it. It was Raditz. He had never been so relieved to see the cold-hearted Saiyan, a warrior he'd once viewed with nothing but contempt. Despite their past, Tien knew Raditz had changed since that first brutal day he set foot on Earth. Raditz didn't even flinch as the blast hurtled toward him. With a casual swipe of his hand, he deflected the Milky Cannon to the side, sending it spiraling into the distance where it erupted harmlessly in a cloud of dust. He glanced over his shoulder at Tien, his expression calm yet fierce. Raditz reached into a small pouch at his waist and pulled out a sensu bean, holding it out to Tien. You look like you could use this, he said in his low, gruff voice, handing Tien the bean. Tien accepted the bean with a shaky nod, chewing it quickly. Instantly, his injuries healed, and his energy surged back, his body feeling lighter and stronger. He sat up, watching as Raditz strode confidently toward Bardock and Krillin, offering each of them a sensu bean as well. Bardock accepted with a quiet nod of appreciation, while Krillin managed a weak grin, relief evident in his eyes. Turning back to Captain Ginyu, Raditz's gaze sharpened, his face settling into a look of grim determination. Your fight is with me now, he declared, his voice steady and commanding. He turned his head slightly toward Tien, Krillin, and Bardock, his eyes narrowed in warning. The others will stay out of this. Is that understood? Ginyu's grin only widened, his gaze flickering with a savage delight. Fine by me, he taunted, rolling his shoulders as he cracked his knuckles. I could use a punching bag. Vegeta lay sprawled on the rocky ground, his breaths ragged, his body beaten and bruised. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, staining his armor and pooling onto the cracked dirt beneath him. But despite the agony tearing through his body, the relentless torment wasn't over. Frieza loomed over him, grinning with sadistic pleasure, clearly savoring every second of the sane prince's pain. He wasn't trying to kill Vegeta. Not yet. No, Frieza wanted him to suffer. Is this really all you've got, Prince? Frieza taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. He raised a foot, and with calculated cruelty, drove it into Vegeta's stomach, sending a fresh wave of pain through him. Vegeta clenched his jaw, refusing to give Frieza the satisfaction of hearing him scream, but his vision blurred from the intensity of it. Frieza only laughed harder, relishing the look of agony etched on Vegeta's face. Suddenly, a high-pitched beep echoed from Frieza's scouter. He frowned, tapping the device as it registered a massive power level approaching fast. Now, who could that be? He muttered, annoyance flashing across his face. Before he could ponder further, a figure landed on the battlefield with a thud, sending a shockwave rippling across the rocky terrain. Frieza's eyes narrowed as he took in the newcomer, a tall, muscular Saiyan with fierce black eyes and wild hair. He wore a green gi over a black undershirt, his stance steady, and his gaze locked onto the tyrant. "You must be Frieza," Kakarot said, his voice calm but edged with unmistakable intensity. Frieza tilted his head, unimpressed. "And you are," he sneered. "Kakarot," the Saiyan replied, walking past Frieza without breaking eye contact and kneeling beside the fallen prince. Carefully, he pulled out a sensu bean, the last one he had, and pressed it gently into Vegeta's mouth. "You'll need this," he murmured. Vegeta's eyes fluttered open as the bean took effect. His injuries mended in an instant, strength and vitality flooding back into his body. He staggered to his feet, feeling his power surge back to full force. He glanced at Kakarot, a mixture of surprise and gratitude flashing across his features, though he quickly masked it. "Thanks," he muttered, swallowing his pride. Kakarot nodded. "Stay out of this fight," he said firmly, his gaze hardening. "He's mine." Vegeta chuckled, the ghost of a smirk playing at his lips. "You can have him," he replied, his tone dry. "I've got better things to do than die today." And with that, he backed away, keeping a wary eye on Frieza before slipping quietly toward the shadows. Frieza watched the two Saiyans with a puzzled look, his eyes narrowing as he tried to comprehend the scene. He hadn't missed Vegeta's miraculous recovery, but he could deal with that later. For now, he turned his attention back to Kakarot, amusement flickering in his eyes. "So you're the one who slaughtered my soldiers?" he asked with a cold laugh. "I think I'll take great pleasure in killing you for that." Kakarot's face remained impassive, but a dark fire smoldered in his eyes. "You destroyed my home, my people," he replied, his voice low and steady. "I'm here to end you for that." As the two prepared to clash, Vegeta slipped away, making his way through the debris and shattered rocks toward Frieza's towering spaceship. "Now, where are those Dragon Balls?" he thought, his mind racing. "If Kakarot keeps Frieza busy long enough, I might just get my wish." His lips curled into a determined grin as he moved silently through the entrance, adrenaline coursing through him. Inside the ship, the dim corridors were eerily silent, illuminated only by the cold, artificial lights lining the walls. Vegeta's footsteps echoed as he made his way deeper into Frieza's domain, heading toward the throne room. The Dragon Balls are bound to be in there, he thought, anticipation building with every step. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. "Where do you think you're going?" Vegeta turned to find a henchman blocking his path, his blaster aimed directly at the Saiyan prince's chest. The soldier's face was twisted with arrogance, clearly relishing what he thought would be an easy capture. But Vegeta's expression was one of utter disdain. "That's none of your concern," Vegeta replied coldly, raising his hand. Without even sparing the henchman a second thought, he unleashed a small but precise energy blast. The beam tore through the henchman's armor, obliterating him instantly. His weapon clattered to the floor, and Vegeta stepped over it without a backward glance. Minutes later, Vegeta finally reached Frieza's private chambers. The large metal doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the throne room. There, glinting in the dim light, was his prize, the Dragon Balls, each one glowing with a golden hue, waiting for someone worthy to make their wish. A satisfied smirk spread across Vegeta's face as he stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on the orbs. Frieza crouched low, his tail flicking behind him, as he observed the Saiyan warrior standing before him. This one was different from Vegeta. He could feel it. Something about the way Kakarot held himself hinted at a confidence and control that Vegeta lacked. Interesting, Frieza thought, his eyes narrowing. Though his scouter registered Kakarot's power at only 250,000, he had a strange feeling this fight wouldn't be as easy as the one with the beaten prince. His musings were cut short as Kakarot launched forward, aiming a fierce kick at Frieza's head. Frieza moved almost lazily, raising his arm to block the kick with a smirk. He retaliated instantly, shooting a fist toward Kakarot's exposed leg, but Kakarot anticipated the move, flipping back with a quickness that took Frieza by surprise. "Oh?" Frieza's smirk widened, Impressive. You've managed to avoid death for a few extra seconds. Kakarot's eyes gleamed, and he straightened, an intense red aura flaring around him. His power doubled, the ground trembling under the weight of his energy. I'm just getting started, he said, his voice calm but charged with determination. Frieza's scouter beeped wildly, the numbers climbing. Ah, stronger than I thought, he mused, a hint of amusement in his tone. It seems I might need to use both hands to finish you. Kakarot's gaze hardened. You're going to need a lot more than that, he shouted, charging forward again. With a burst of speed, he aimed the same kick toward Frieza's head. But this time, Frieza ducked, countering with a brutal punch to Kakarot's midsection, only to feel his fist connect with nothing but air. A blur of motion revealed Kakarot behind him, already swinging a powerful fist at the back of Frieza's head. Frieza whipped around just in time, raising his arm to block. Meanwhile, Captain Ginyu charged at Raditz, his fist poised for a direct hit to the Saiyans' face. But Raditz barely moved, simply shifting his head a few inches to the side as Ginyu's fist flew past. The purple-skinned captain snarled, frustration mounting, as he threw a rapid series of punches and kicks, each aimed to break through Raditz's calm defense. Yet somehow, Raditz seemed to dodge each attack with effortless grace, barely even bothering to block. Why can't I hit you? Ginyu bellowed in frustration, pouring his energy into a final desperate punch aimed at Raditz's stomach. But once again, he struck nothing but an afterimage. In a flash, Raditz appeared behind him, delivering a swift kick to Ginyu's lower back that sent the captain reeling forward. Because you're weak, Raditz stated flatly, his voice calm as he floated back down to the ground. He turned his gaze to Bardock, Tien, and Krillin, who were watching the battle with tense anticipation. I've got this fool under control. You three need to get the Dragon Balls. Bardock nodded, his expression resolute. Right, let's head back to Guru's and grab the radar. With a final glance toward Raditz, Bardock, Tien, and Krillin took off, flying at full speed toward Guru's house, their mission clear. Raditz shifted his attention back to Ginyu, who was struggling to regain his balance, clutching his stomach and glaring at the Saiyan. I'm going to give you one chance, Raditz said, his voice as cold as steel. Surrender now, and I won't make this hurt any more than it already does. Ginyu let out a bitter laugh, straightening up, despite the pain that radiated through his torso. I don't think so, he spat, lunging forward in a renewed attack. But before he could even throw a punch, Raditz's fist shot out like a bullet, burying deep into Ginyu's stomach. The impact doubled the purple warrior over, and he stumbled back, clutching his abdomen, his face twisted in pain. How? Ginyu stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Raditz chuckled, folding his arms across his chest as he looked down at his struggling opponent. I've done some training since you last saw me, he replied, a smirk playing on his lips. Turns out my little brother has some pretty incredible techniques. Ginyu grinned wickedly, feeling the stirring of a dangerous plan within him. He still had one final trick left, a move he only used in desperate situations. With a low chuckle, he clenched his fist, charging it with energy. Then, without hesitation, drove it into his own chest. Pain surged through him, but he held steady, gathering his life force for his signature move. His eyes locked onto Raditz, and he shouted, "Change now!" A purple beam of energy shot from his body, striking Raditz head on. Blinding light and swirling energy erupted between them, obscuring both warriors from view. When the light finally faded, Raditz blinked, his mind swimming with confusion. Across from him, he saw himself. He glanced down, a sickening feeling flooding through him. His hands were purple, his fingers tipped with claws. A deep wound gaped in his chest, oozing blood. No, what's going on? Raditz muttered, horrified, his voice now carrying Ginyu's gravelly tone. A sinister laugh echoed across the battlefield as Ginyu, now in Raditz's body, stretched his limbs, testing his new strength. You fool, he sneered. You didn't know I could switch bodies? It's how I always come out on top. Whenever someone stronger appears, I just take what's theirs. He sprang forward, driving his knee into Raditz's stomach with brutal force. Raditz, now trapped in Ginyu's battered body, choked, his knees buckling from the power of his own former strength. Ginyu smirked, flexing his new arms as he felt the energy coursing through them. Yes, I think I'll enjoy this body. I may not be able to fight at full power just yet, but it won't take long to adjust. He glanced toward the horizon, where Bardock, Tien, and Krillin had flown off. "And now, to deal with your little friends," he said, launching into the air with his newly acquired power, a cruel glint in his eyes. Meanwhile, Kakarot and Frieza's fierce battle continued. Kakarot threw a hard punch at Frieza's face, but the tyrant tilted his head just in time, dodging the blow with ease. He retaliated immediately, aiming a vicious strike at Kakarot's midsection, hoping to catch him off guard, but Kakarot was faster. He sprang upward, avoiding Frieza's attack, and took the battle to the sky. Frieza followed in an instant, a smirk on his lips. With a flick of his wrist, he formed a small, crackling ball of energy and hurled it toward the Saiyan warrior. Kakarot paused mid-air, spotting the oncoming attack, and with a focused swing of his arm, batted the blast away effortlessly. He then tucked in, diving straight down toward Frieza at full speed, determination burning in his eyes. Frieza saw him coming and threw a punch aimed directly at Kakarot's face, but his fist met only air. Kakarot had vanished in a blur, leaving an afterimage behind. Frieza's eyes darted around, trying to locate him, and then he spotted Kakarot below, standing calmly on the ground, his hands cupped at his side. Without hesitation, Kakarot focused his energy, his voice ringing out powerfully. Kamehameha! A fierce blue beam of energy erupted from his hands, roaring toward Frieza like a tidal wave. Frieza reacted quickly, raising his hands to block the attack, but he was stunned by the sheer force of it. The blast pushed him higher into the air, its relentless energy threatening to overwhelm him. Gritting his teeth, Frieza forced himself free from the blast and landed some distance away, breathing hard. He wiped a thin trail of blood from his mouth, staring down at the Saiyan with a look of newfound respect. "I must say, I'm impressed," he admitted, his tone laced with grudging admiration. "Few warriors have managed to keep up with me." Kakarot's eyes flashed, his expression unyielding. "I'm only getting started," he replied. In an instant, Kakarot's aura intensified, blazing brighter than before as he rocketed forward, moving with a speed that left Frieza reeling. Before the tyrant could react, Kakarot's fist connected with Frieza's stomach, landing with such power that it drove the air from Frieza's lungs and sent a spray of blood and spit from his mouth. Frieza staggered, eyes wide with shock. Kakarot didn't let up, his movements smooth and unrelenting. He spun, his legs swinging around in a powerful arc, his foot colliding with Frieza's temple. The impact sent Frieza hurtling across the grassy battlefield, his body skidding over the ground as he struggled to regain control. Frieza rose slowly, brushing the dust from his shoulder and wiping a trickle of blood from his chin with one clawed finger. His eyes narrowed, studying Kakarot with a hint of something that almost resembled respect, or perhaps just dark amusement. "Well, well, it seems you're stronger than you let on," Frieza drawled. "Not a single fighter besides my father has ever managed to make me bleed. You've earned a small bit of my respect." Kakarot tilted his head, a half smile on his face. "I do what I can," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes remained sharp, ready for whatever Frieza would throw at him next. Frieza chuckled, the sound dark and menacing. "Enjoy your little victory while it lasts, because you are still no match for my true power." He glanced at Kakarot, as if expecting fear. "I'm sure you fought Zarban by now," he continued, waving a hand dismissively. "You know, he isn't the only one who can transform." With a cold smirk, Frieza clenched his fists at his sides, and his energy began to surge. It radiated outward in waves, cracking the ground beneath him and causing the air itself to vibrate. His scouter began beeping erratically as his power spiked, and cracks formed in his sleek armor. As his muscles grew, his entire body expanded, transforming from his usual slender form to a towering figure nearly 7 feet tall, his muscles bulging grotesquely. His horns extended upward, curving with deadly sharpness. When he finally straightened, Frieza's new form loomed over Kakarot, casting a menacing shadow. "You should know," he hissed, his voice deeper, dripping with malice, "that my power level in this form exceeds 1 million. Not far from the battlefield, Vegeta soared through the sky, a smirk plastered across his face. Behind him, the Dragon Balls floated, suspended in the air by his newfound ability to manipulate objects with his mind. The telekinesis had been tricky to master, but after a few minutes of focus, he was maneuvering the massive orbs with ease. And sneaking past Frieza, that had been almost too easy. The tyrant was completely absorbed in his fight with Kakarot. Vegeta let out a small laugh, boosting his speed, as he sensed the faint, distant power of Kakarot's brat and the other Earthlings. No doubt they had at least one Dragon Ball with them. Soon, immortality will be mine, he muttered, his grin widening. With all 7 Dragon Balls, his wish was just within reach. Elsewhere, Bardock, Krillin, and Tien landed outside Guru's house. As they touched down, Krillin turned to the Saiyan warrior with a questioning look. "So, are you ever going to tell me how you two got so strong so fast?" he asked, shaking his head in wonder. "It's not like you had time to train enough to reach these levels. Not that I'm complaining. The help against the Ginyu force was definitely appreciated." Bardock chuckled, crossing his arms. "It wasn't training," he explained. "Guru unlocked our hidden power. I'm sure he can do the same for you." The 3 stepped inside, where Denda, Bulma, and Naeul sat with the towering Namekian elder. As they entered, Bulma looked up, her eyes lighting up with relief. "You're back," she exclaimed, running over to Bardock and pulling him into a tight hug. "I was worried sick about you." "I'm fine, Mom," Bardock reassured her, though his tattered clothes and scuffed armor told a different story. Bulma raised an eyebrow, placing her hands on her hips and giving him a skeptical look. "Really?" she said, clearly unconvinced. Bardock rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Okay, there was a little trouble, but Uncle Raditz showed up and took care of it. "We don't have time to waste," Tien interjected, steering the conversation back to the task at hand. "We need to gather the remaining Dragon Balls and use them to bring everyone back." Bulma's face grew serious as she glanced down at the Dragon Radar in her hand. "It's not going to be that easy," she warned. "From what I've pieced together, Frieza has already gathered 5 of the Dragon Balls, and they're back at his ship." "I can feel my dad's power out there fighting him," Bardock added, his expression hardening. "That should keep Frieza distracted for a while." Bulma nodded thoughtfully, studying the radar. "Then we might have a chance to get the other 5. Her voice trailed off as her eyes widened. "Wait a minute, they're heading this way," she said, watching as the 5 dots on the radar started moving closer. Bardock's brow furrowed as he focused, his senses picking up on a familiar energy. "It's Vegeta," he said grimly, "and he's stronger than before." Krillin's face paled slightly. "He was on our side though, right?" Tien shook his head. "Vegeta only cares about one thing, eternal life. We can't let him get that wish." "You'll have to hold him off until we can make our wish then," Bulma said, her voice steady but her eyes tense. "Once we wish everyone back, the Dragon Balls will be inactive. Frieza won't be able to use them." "Excuse me," Dende interjected, raising his hand slightly. His voice was small but urgent. "Purunga, the Namekian dragon. He cannot bring back more than one person at a time." A heavy silence fell over the room. Bardock's face darkened. "What? But we have several friends we need to revive," he said, frustration edging into his voice. "And let's not forget all the Namekians Frieza's men have killed," Tien added, crossing his arms. "We can't leave them behind." Bulma took a deep breath, clearly thinking fast. "Then we'll wish Piccolo back first," she suggested, her tone firm. "Once he's alive, we can use Earth's Dragon Balls later to bring everyone else back. We just have to get started." "Assuming Piccolo doesn't get any ideas of his own," Tien muttered. "We've never exactly trusted him." Dende shook his head, raising a hand. "Purunga grants 3 wishes," he explained. "You could use one of your other wishes to bring Piccolo here, so he can't do anything on his own." Krillin's eyes widened in surprise. 3 wishes? He asked, glancing at the others. "We didn't know the Namekian dragon was that powerful." Out on the battlefield, Kakarot stood facing Frieza's transformed state. The tyrant's muscles bulged, his body twice its previous size, and packed with raw power that radiated out in visible waves. Kakarot could feel the intensity of Frieza's energy, nearly double what it had been before. And the changeling's new form was more monstrous, more intimidating than anything Kakarot had faced. Before he could fully grasp the enormity of this power, Frieza lunged at him, a giant fist swinging toward his jaw. The impact was brutal, sending Kakarot staggering back, his feet skidding across the rocky terrain. The force rattled his bones, and he could taste blood in his mouth as he wiped a thin trickle from his lip. Frieza's mouth twisted into a grin. "Impressive. Not many outside of my family can take a punch like that from me in this form." Kakarot's expression hardened, and he dropped into a fighting stance, his red aura flaring up around him as he allowed his power to rise to meet Frieza's. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice unwavering. With a burst of speed, Kakarot shot forward, aiming a punch directly at Frieza's face. But the tyrant caught Kakarot's fist in his massive hand, holding him in place with surprising ease. Kakarot's eyes narrowed as he swung with his other fist, but Frieza snatched it mid-air too, locking both of Kakarot's fists in his crushing grip. The two warriors were locked in a fierce power struggle, muscles straining as they pressed against each other, each testing the other's strength. Kakarot's aura pulsed brighter, his feet digging into the ground as he pushed harder, but Frieza held firm, his grin widening. Back at Guru's house, Krillin stepped outside, his fists clenched in exhilaration as he punched at the air. He felt incredible, his power skyrocketing after Guru had unlocked his hidden strength. Every cell in his body seemed to hum with energy, a natural, steady force far beyond anything he'd reached before. Even when he'd pushed himself with Kaioken, there was no strain this time, no burning in his muscles. This power was all his. Bardock joined him, watching Krillin with a knowing smile. "How does it feel?" he asked, his voice calm, but his eyes glinting with pride. Krillin looked over, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Amazing. I never realized I had this kind of power inside me." Bardock nodded. "I know the feeling." Krillin laughed. "Well, I bet you do. You're still stronger than me after all." "It's a sane thing," Bardock replied with a smirk. "We get stronger after every fight." Their conversation was cut short as Tien stepped outside, his eyes narrowing as he looked out toward the horizon. "Something's wrong," he murmured. "I can sense Raditz's power approaching, but something feels off." Bardock straightened, his face darkening as he too felt the strange energy closing in. "You're right. That doesn't feel like Uncle Raditz." The warriors tensed as a figure approached from the distance, landing just a few yards away from them. It was Raditz, or at least it looked like him. But something in his eyes was different, cold and sinister. Ginyu, now in Raditz's body, smirked, taking a fighting stance. "So, now that bothersome Saiyan is out of the way, I think I'll enjoy finishing off you three," he sneered, his voice dripping with Bardock narrowed his eyes, his stance tightening as he studied the figure before him. "I get the feeling you're not really my uncle," he said, suspicion sharpening his tone. Ginyu, now wearing Raditz's face, only grinned, folding his arms confidently. Just then, Raditz, now trapped in Ginyu's purple-skinned body, flew up, hovering nearby. "He stole my body!" Raditz shouted down, his voice rough with frustration. "Be careful fighting him!" "So that's your little trick," Bardock muttered, understanding dawning in his eyes. "It gets result," Ginyu replied, flashing a smug smile as he flexed his new, powerful limbs. "You'd be surprised how handy it is, switching bodies whenever I please." Bardock's expression hardened. "Then, I'll just have to knock you around until you give it back," he declared, clenching his fists. Ginyu laughed, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You foolish boy, don't you realize? In this body, I'm far stronger than you'll ever be. Raditz's power now belongs to me." Bardock's lips curled into a small smile as he shook his head. "Maybe, but not all of it. I can sense it. You're not using the full strength of that body. You're weaker than Raditz was." Ginyu's grin faltered just slightly, but before he could reply, Bardock launched forward, closing the gap between them in a split second. He aimed a powerful kick at Ginyu's midsection. Ginyu had no time to block, and the impact sent him flying off the pillar surrounding Guru's house, his body hurtling through the air until he crashed into a nearby lake with a tremendous splash. Bardock turned to Krillin and Tien. "Stay here and handle Vegeta if he shows up," he instructed, his voice serious. "I'll take care of this one." Without waiting for a reply, Bardock shot off, chasing after the body snatcher with a fierce determination. Meanwhile, Kakarot and Frieza's battle raged on. Frieza lunged forward, driving his knee toward Kakarot's stomach, but Kakarot reacted instantly, raising his own knee to block the attack. Their legs collided with a shockwave, the force pushing them both back slightly, but neither warrior gave any ground. They immediately sprang forward again, fists and kicks flying at each other at lightning speed, the air crackling with each impact. Frieza threw a powerful punch aimed at Kakarot's head, but Kakarot disappeared just before the attack landed, his form flickering out of sight. He reappeared behind Frieza, aiming a fierce kick at the changeling's head, but his attack connected only with an afterimage. Frieza's mocking laugh echoed as he appeared below Kakarot, pointing a single finger up at him. "Death Beam!" he shouted, a thin, deadly beam of pink energy shooting straight at the Saiyan. But Kakarot vanished again, leaving only an afterimage in his place. He reappeared behind Frieza, swinging a backhanded strike toward the tyrant's head. Frieza spun around just in time, blocking the blow with his hand and retaliating with a downward punch aimed at Kakarot's face. Kakarot leapt into the air, narrowly avoiding the attack, then spun and delivered a powerful kick that broke through Frieza's defenses, landing solidly in his midsection. Frieza stumbled back a step, but quickly recovered, throwing a massive fist into Kakarot's face, returning the favor with just as much force. Kakarot staggered, but quickly steadied himself, both fighters pulling back, each barely affected by the brutal exchange. Frieza chuckled, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "What do you say we turn this up a notch?" Kakarot's lips curled into a confident smirk. "And here I thought you were already giving it your all," he replied, his tone challenging. Frieza sneered, his expression darkening. "I'm not even close to my maximum," he said, a sinister edge to his voice. He clenched his fists at his sides, and a white aura began to swirl around him, growing in intensity. As his energy spiked, his horns turned a bone-white color, and his body began to contort and shift. His head stretched, 2 additional sets of horns sprouting from his skull, making him look even more monstrous. When the transformation finished, Frieza stood taller, his gaze colder and more predatory than before. "Now let's see if you can handle my third form," he sneered, his voice a low growl filled with menace. Raditz arrived just in time to see his nephew, Bardock, battling fiercely against Ginyu not far from Guru's house. From the looks of it, Bardock was overwhelmingly dominating. The young Saiyan was a blur, his speed and power pushing Ginyu to his absolute limit. Ginyu lunged forward with a punch, aiming straight for Bardock's face, but Bardock vanished a split second before Ginyu's fist could connect, reappearing instantly below the unsuspecting warrior. With lightning precision, Bardock drove his knee up, slamming it into Ginyu's gut. Ginyu doubled over, a spray of spit flying from his mouth as he staggered back, completely stunned. Not wasting a heartbeat, Bardock soared above Ginyu, bringing both fists down hard on his head. The force of the blow sent Ginyu crashing into the ground, the impact leaving a deep crater beneath him. As he struggled to his feet, Ginyu wiped a thin trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth. His eyes burned with frustration and disbelief. How can this brat be stronger than this body?" he muttered, almost as if trying to convince himself it wasn't true. "It's simple." Raditz's voice cut through the air with a calm, smug assurance. "You may have taken my body, but you have no idea how to tap into its true power." Ginyu glared at Raditz, but before he could fire back, Bardock dove down again, his knee connecting with Ginyu's face, sending him stumbling back. Bardock followed up with a powerful punch, then another, each strike pushing Ginyu further into a dazed stupor. The young Saiyan capped off his relentless combo with a devastating roundhouse kick, which sent Ginyu hurtling across the ground, dust and debris trailing in his wake. Bardock landed gracefully, watching as Ginyu struggled to rise. "Give it up," he said coolly, eyeing his uncle's body, now battered and bleeding. "You're outmatched. There's no way you can win this fight." Ginyu staggered to his feet, wiping his face. A fierce determination flickered in his eyes as he clenched his fists, his knuckles white. He let out a scream of raw defiance, and a shimmering white aura began to form around him, his power inching upward as he tried to summon every ounce of strength that Raditz's body had to offer. Kakarot locked eyes with Frieza, who had just transformed into his third form, a twisted, monstrous shape that looked far more menacing than before. Frieza let out a smug laugh, his tail whipping back and forth. "I see you're frightened, Saiyan," he sneered. Kakarot's gaze didn't waver. He smirked, holding his ground. "I'll give you this. You've impressed me. But don't think for a second that I can't handle this." He took a deep breath, feeling the heat build within him. "Kaioken, times 10!" he shouted, his aura flaring into a brilliant red, blazing like fire. In an instant, Kakarot shot forward, his speed unmatched. He closed the distance between them in a heartbeat and drove a powerful punch straight into Frieza's jaw. The blow rocked Frieza's entire body, forcing him to stagger back. But Frieza wasn't going down that easily. Gritting his teeth, he shot his leg out, attempting to trip Kakarot. Kakarot flipped back in a fluid motion, landing on his feet just in time to block Frieza's 3 rapid follow-up punches. Each strike echoed through the air, the ground trembling beneath them. Frieza's tail whipped around, aiming for Kakarot's neck, but it struck only an afterimage. Kakarot reappeared right behind him, tapping him lightly on the shoulder. "Looking for me?" he said with a smirk. Frieza whirled around, fist clenched and ready. But Kakarot's own fist was already on a collision course with his gut. The impact drove the air from Frieza's lungs, blood and spit spraying from his mouth. Kakarot followed up with a knee that connected solidly with Frieza's jaw, sending the tyrant flying backward across the rocky Namekian landscape. Frieza managed to flip midair and land on his feet. His face twisted with rage, and he pointed a finger at the oncoming Kakarot, firing a barrage of death beams in quick succession. But Kakarot was undeterred. He flashed in and out of view, effortlessly dodging each beam as he closed in on Frieza once more. Finally, he appeared directly in front of the tyrant, his hand gripping Frieza's wrist in a vice-like hold. He glared at him, his voice cold with resolve. "This is for all the Saiyans you slaughtered," he said, his words laced with fury as he drove his knee forcefully into Frieza's stomach. Frieza stumbled, clutching his midsection where Kakarot's knee had struck him. Pain and fury mixed on his face as he struggled to make sense of it. This filthy Saiyan was pushing him in his third form. He could hardly believe it, but even as the thought crossed his mind, a flash of doubt entered. Could this warrior actually be the fabled Super Saiyan? No, he dismissed the idea quickly. This monkey was still far from his own true power. Well, well, Frieza sneered, regaining his composure as he rose to his feet. Color me impressed. No one outside of my own family has ever kept up with me this well. He glanced at Kakarot with a sinister smirk. I suppose it's time to show you my true form. With that, Frieza clenched his fists tightly at his sides, and a surge of power began to radiate from him. A blinding light enveloped his body, forcing Kakarot to shield his eyes against the dazzling glow. The ground trembled as Frieza's aura flared even brighter, taking on a form far more refined and powerful. The spikes receded, his elongated head shrank back, and his body condensed into a lean, compact figure. His skin was now a pristine white, with purple patches on his head, knees, and elbows, almost deceptively unassuming. "That's more like it," Frieza said with a cruel, satisfied grin. "Now let's see what a mighty Saiyan can do against my ultimate form." Meanwhile, Ginyu cackled as he felt the strength he had managed to unlock in Raditz's body. The newfound power coursed through him, and he could feel its potential rising. "Now," he said with a sinister grin, "I think I finally have the hang of this." He shot toward Bardock, moving faster than before, and landed a brutal punch squarely on the young Saiyan's jaw. The impact sent Bardock flying backward, skidding across the ground. Ginyu wasted no time, pursuing his quarry with unrelenting ferocity, launching a barrage of kicks and punches that struck before Bardock could even fully land. The combo ended with a vicious elbow to Bardock's back, smashing him down into the earth, forming a deep crater beneath him. Standing over the dust-filled crater, Ginyu sneered. "Looks like this body's just too much for you to handle after all," he taunted. "I think I'll keep it. Feels like something I could get used to." From within the crater, Bardock's voice rang out in defiance. "Kaioken, ×2. A fierce red aura exploded around him as he rocketed out of the pit, faster than lightning. Before Ginyu could even blink, Bardock delivered a powerful kick to his face, the blow sending Ginyu soaring backward. Tumbling through the air, Bardock vanished in a blur, only to reappear behind Ginyu, where he drove an uppercut deep into the stolen body's stomach, doubling Ginyu over. In one swift move, Bardock grabbed Ginyu by the arm and hurled him high into the sky, sending him hurtling into the air like a rag doll. Taking a steady stance on the ground, Bardock cupped his hands together, his aura intensifying as he channeled energy into his next attack. The words echoed through the sky, powerful and resolute. "Kamahama. Hey!" A brilliant blue beam shot from Bardock's hands, hurtling toward Ginyu, who barely had time to register the attack. The beam struck him with unyielding force, erupting in an explosion that rocked the landscape, filling the air with a blinding light and a deafening roar. When the dust settled, Ginyu emerged, blood dripping from a series of wounds now marking Raditz's borrowed body. Panting, he glared down at the Saiyan below. "You, little brat," he hissed through gritted teeth. He could feel the limits of Raditz's body weakening with each blow he endured. The boy was somehow stronger than this body could handle. He knew he'd have to make a desperate move if he wanted any chance of surviving this battle. With grim determination, Ginyu tightened his fist and drove it deep into his own chest, inches from his heart. He unleashed a small but deadly energy attack inside the body, tearing a hole through vital muscle and sinew. A twisted smile crossed his face as he thought, that should keep the brat from being able to use this body when I'm done with it. Raising his hand toward Bardock, Ginyu gathered the last of his energy, grinning maliciously. "Change now," he shouted, releasing his body change wave toward the young Saiyan. Bardock's eyes blazed with determination as he faced down Ginyu, who was charging up his body change wave, desperate to swap bodies once more. But Bardock wasn't about to let that happen. He gritted his teeth, summoning more of his energy. "Kaioken, ×3, he shouted, his aura flaring even brighter with intense red energy, his speed pushing beyond anything Ginyu could follow. Just as Ginyu's attack flew toward him, Bardock leapt out of its path. In one smooth move, he reached out, grabbed Raditz, still trapped in Ginyu's body, and hurled him directly into the incoming wave. The flash of light that followed was blinding, but when it cleared, Ginyu and Raditz were both back in their original forms. Ginyu staggered, now back in his own weakened, bruised body, while Raditz lay on the ground, barely moving, but finally himself again. Ginyu's eyes were wide with disbelief. How did you dodge that?" he stammered, a mix of rage and confusion twisting his features. "No one has ever dodged my body change attack." Bardock's gaze was unyielding as he glared at the disoriented Ginyu. Well, there's a first time for everything. Without wasting another second, Bardock cupped his hands, gathering energy at his side. Me, ha, he shouted, unleashing a blazing wave of blue energy that rocketed toward Ginyu. The blast struck Ginyu head-on, engulfing him entirely. His scream echoed briefly before it was swallowed by the crackling energy, and in a final flash, all traces of the purple-skinned warrior vanished. Bardock wasted no time. He rushed over to Raditz, gently lifting his uncle's head. "Raditz, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. Raditz coughed, managing a weak grin. "Oh, just great," he replied, wincing slightly. Bardock's gaze dropped, his heart sinking as he noticed the wound in his uncle's chest. Captain Ginyu had done serious damage. Raditz's body was barely holding on. Bardock quickly searched through Raditz's pouch, hoping for a senzu bean, only to find it empty. His uncle must have used the last of them to help Bardock and his friends earlier. "Hold on, Raditz," Bardock said firmly, determination in his voice as he lifted his injured uncle. "I've got to get you to Guru's. They might have something to help you there." Without another word, he took to the air, speeding toward the Elder's house, hoping they had some way to save his uncle. Elsewhere on Namek, Vegeta approached the tall, pillar-like house where he'd sensed Raditz and Kakarot's brat not long ago. Standing outside the house were Tien and Krillin, each holding one of the Dragon Balls they'd managed to collect, along with a small Namekian boy beside them. Vegeta's face broke into a smug grin. "Nice of you to gather those for me," he sneered. Tien's eyes narrowed. "We didn't gather them for you, Vegeta. We have our own wishes to make." Vegeta's smirk widened, his tone mocking. "Well then, it looks like we have a bit of a problem, don't we?" Krillin stepped forward, his stance firm. "We're not letting you use the Dragon Balls to make yourself immortal, Vegeta. That would be way too dangerous." Vegeta's expression darkened. "You don't get it, do you? We have no choice. Becoming immortal is the only chance any of us have against Frieza. From what I can sense, it feels like Kakarot's doing all right out there," Krillin replied, refusing to back down. Vegeta's voice rose with irritation, his pride flaring. "I am the Prince of all Saiyans. I'll be the one to beat Frieza, not that low-class clown." Tien stepped in, his tone calm but firm. "Listen, Vegeta. These Dragon Balls can grant 3 wishes. We need the first 2 wishes for ourselves." Vegeta hesitated, his eyes narrowed. Finally, he nodded, conceding for now. "Fine, but the 3rd wish is mine. I'll use it to make myself immortal." "All right," Tien agreed cautiously. "Just put your Dragon Balls down with the ones we have, so we can summon the dragon." With a reluctant grunt, Vegeta placed his Dragon Balls alongside the 2 that Tien and Krillin held. The small Namekian boy, Denda, stepped forward, lifting his arms as he began to chant in the Namekian language. "Arise, Purunga," he called out. Instantly, the sky above darkened, thick storm clouds swirling overhead as bolts of lightning began to flash. The air crackled with energy as a blinding flash of lightning struck the Dragon Balls, and a massive yellow stream of light shot up into the sky. The light twisted and coiled, taking shape until it solidified into a towering, muscular dragon. Unlike Shenron, Purunga had a powerful, robust build with an appearance closer to that of a Namekian warrior. The dragon's deep, booming voice echoed across the landscape. "You who have awoken me, speak, and I shall grant you 3 wishes." Dende stepped forward once more, addressing Purunga in Namekian. After a few moments, the mighty dragon's voice rang out again. "The one called Piccolo will be brought back to life," Purunga declared, his voice resonating through the air. On King Kai's planet, Nappa, Yamcha, Piccolo, and King Kai had been intently watching the events unfold on Namek. As they observed the distant battle, Piccolo's halo suddenly disappeared, fading away into nothing. Nappa's eyes widened, and he let out a loud laugh, clapping Piccolo on the back. "Well, look at that. Looks like you're alive again, green guy." King Kai turned to Piccolo, his voice carrying a grave warning. "They're going to wish you to Namek next. Listen, Piccolo. Under no circumstances are you to face Frieza. Do you hear me? You're no match for him. I know you want to prove yourself, but this is far beyond anything you've faced before." Piccolo crossed his arms, his gaze steady and defiant. "I'll do what I have to do, King Kai. If I ever hope to rule the Earth one day, I need to prove I'm the strongest. Eliminating the competition seems like a good place to start," he added with a dark chuckle. Nappa shook his head, rolling his eyes. "Hasn't dying taught you anything, Piccolo? There's more to life than just world domination, you know." A shadow of contemplation flickered across Piccolo's face, but he quickly pushed it away. "Maybe you're right, Nappa, but it's not just that. Frieza's henchmen humiliated me back at the 23rd World Martial Arts Tournament. I've been called a demon, a monster, but I refuse to be treated as if I'm irrelevant. Not anymore." Back on Namek, Dende recited another phrase in his native language, his voice carrying a tone of confidence as he finished the wish. "The one called Piccolo will be brought to Namek," Purunga's voice boomed, echoing across the land. The dragon's eyes flashed red, and with a shimmer of energy, Piccolo appeared, standing right among the gathered warriors. Tien nodded in acknowledgement. "Piccolo," he said, recognizing the green-skinned warrior who still radiated a fierce energy. Piccolo gave a grunt, his expression unchanging. "Don't get too comfortable, Tien. I'm only on your side as long as this threat remains. Once Frieza is gone, things will be different." Krillin managed a slight smile, keeping his tone casual. "That's good enough for now, Piccolo. But Guru, the elder of this world, wants to see you. He's up in that house on the hill." He pointed to Guru's place, its towering structure overlooking the horizon. Piccolo shrugged, eyeing the house with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. This was his first time seeing his home planet, and the strange feelings bubbling within him were almost overwhelming. Namek's atmosphere felt oddly familiar, yet so foreign. He didn't know what to expect from Guru, but he figured he'd at least hear out this so-called father of the Namekians. As Piccolo entered Guru's house, he found himself face to face with a massive elder Namekian sitting upon an enormous stone chair. Guru's towering figure radiated a quiet strength, while Nail, Guru's warrior, stood guard beside him. Off to the side, Bulma watched, her wide eyes studying Piccolo with both surprise and relief. Guru's gaze was warm, almost fatherly, as he regarded Piccolo. "Welcome, child of Namek," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "It has been many years since you last set foot on this land." Piccolo crossed his arms, his expression guarded. "I don't remember being here," he said, his voice steady but curious. Guru gave a gentle nod. "I know, you were once whole, but now you are a part of what you once were. You were born from a split, a division of the one now known as Kami, who cast away his darkness to become pure. You are a product of that division, born from the evil that was left behind. But you are not your father. You are not King Piccolo. You are your own being, free to choose your own path." Piccolo's expression hardened. "I don't buy it," he replied, his voice edged with defiance. "I'm beyond redemption. All I've known is destruction and a desire for power." Guru's expression remained calm, filled with understanding. "Redemption," he echoed softly. "You have done nothing that requires redemption, Piccolo. You may have spoken of ruling, of domination, but you have always fought to defend. You were created from the dark side of Kami, but you are not inherently evil. The truth is, your nature is peaceful, and your desire to fight has been motivated by the wish to protect." Piccolo felt a strange sensation stirring within him, an impulse he couldn't explain. Almost against his will, he stepped forward, unable to resist the strange pull of Guru's words. Guru extended a hand, placing it gently on Piccolo's head. The touch sent a wave of energy through him, unlocking memories that lay buried deep in his mind. In an instant, images began to flood Piccolo's consciousness. He saw the split between Kami and King Piccolo, the very moment when the two had become separate beings. He witnessed the terror that his father had unleashed upon the earth, the pain and suffering he had caused. But then, Piccolo saw something else, a depth of remorse and guilt within Kami, a feeling that ran so deep it nearly overwhelmed him. Kami had released a monster into the world, a being that carried his own darkness, yet he had never stopped caring for his other half. Piccolo felt the warmth of Kami's compassion, a love that seemed both strange and inexplicably familiar. Through all the hatred, all the chaos, Kami had seen King Piccolo as something more than a monster. He saw him as family, as a part of himself, a bond that in some ways felt closer than that of a brother. And despite everything, Kami had never stopped feeling responsible, caring for his other half with a love that Piccolo could now feel himself. It was like the love of a father for his son. In that moment, Piccolo felt the lingering influence of his father, King Piccolo, fade to the background. He was still himself, still carrying the same memories, the same will, but now he felt clarity. A new sense of purpose surged through him, one that went beyond his old ambitions. He was an Namekian, a being with a place and duty to protect, not just for power, but for the honor of his people and his home. As he opened his eyes, Piccolo looked at Guru with newfound respect. Guru's weary gaze softened as he looked at Piccolo, his words calm but powerful. "You have great potential within you, Piccolo. Now that your mind is clear, I'll see what I can do to align your power more efficiently." Guru raised his hand over Piccolo's head, and a moment later, Piccolo's aura flared, a brilliant energy that seemed to shake the very air around them. It burned bright, fierce, and then settled back down, leaving Piccolo feeling the depth of his strength more vividly than ever before. Guru closed his eyes, his massive head dipping forward. With a final breath, he slumped back in his chair, his spirit peacefully leaving the world. Nail's expression was one of solemn respect. "He's gone," he said quietly. But then his eyes hardened. "Now, let's avenge what's fallen upon Namek." Piccolo's eyes flickered with renewed resolve, but he was cautious. "Hold on, from what I'm sensing out there, it still might not be enough." Nail's fists clenched. "We have to try, Piccolo. Frieza must be stopped, no matter the cost." Piccolo looked at him intently. "I know. That's why I have a plan. We'll have to fuse, Nail. Combine our powers." Nail stared at him, hesitation clouding his gaze. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we fuse, there's no undoing it." Piccolo's expression was resolute. "We don't have a choice, but we'll need to use my body, so we don't lose the Earth's Dragon Balls." Nail took a deep breath, then nodded, understanding the sacrifice. "All right, Piccolo." He placed a hand on Piccolo's arm, and in an instant, Nail's form faded, merging into Piccolo's body. Power surged within Piccolo, his muscles tightening as he felt Nail's essence and energy merge with his own. A new strength coursed through him, both familiar and foreign, amplifying his abilities beyond anything he'd ever felt before. He laughed, feeling the combined strength resonate in his voice, now carrying the subtle blend of Nail's tone. "Yes, now we can finally do this." Without another word, Piccolo shot off like a comet, racing toward the epicenter of the battlefield, where Kakarot was struggling against Frieza. Kakarot lunged at Frieza, pouring every ounce of his strength into his attack. His foot arced through the air, aimed directly for Frieza's head. But Frieza lifted his arm almost lazily, blocking the kick with a casual ease. Before Kakarot could recover, Frieza shot his fist forward, striking Kakarot in the stomach. The impact was brutal, and Kakarot doubled over, gasping for air. Frieza sneered as he spun, whipping his tail around to smack Kakarot square in the face, the force of it sending him stumbling backward. Kakarot's aura flared red as he shouted, "Kaioken, times 20!" His energy spiked, intensifying beyond anything he had ever dared attempt before. He knew the risk, it could tear his body apart, but he had no choice. Frieza's strength was overwhelming, and he needed every ounce of power he could summon. Charging again, he swung a fist at Frieza, putting his full strength into the blow. But Frieza merely caught Kakarot's punch, his grip ironclad as he held the Saiyan in place. "You foolish monkey," he sneered. "Do you finally see how hopeless this is?" Frieza's mocking smile grew wider. "You're giving everything you have, and yet I'm barely using 5% of my power." With a quick, brutal movement, Frieza lifted his leg, slamming his foot up into Kakarot's jaw. The blow sent Kakarot rocketing back, flipping through the air. but he managed to steady himself, gritting his teeth. He cupped his hands together at his side, energy gathering between his palms as he called out, "Ka, me, ha, me, ha!" A brilliant blue beam of energy shot toward Frieza, tearing across the landscape. Frieza, unimpressed, simply raised his hand and swatted the attack away. The blast flew off course, exploding against a distant island in a massive mushroom cloud. Frieza glanced back at Kakarot, his expression amused. "Do you see it now, Sane? The futility of your existence?" Without hesitation, he swung his arm, backhanding Kakarot with crushing force, sending him tumbling across the ground. Kakarot struggled to pull himself up, the pain from Frieza's blows coursing through his body. He could feel himself reaching his limits, his energy dwindling. How was he going to get through this? He hadn't been up against anything this powerful before, and he could barely stand under Frieza's relentless attacks. Suddenly, he sensed a new energy rapidly approaching, a power that was vast, almost overwhelming. The energy felt familiar, Piccolo's, but there was something different, something even stronger. It wasn't like the usual power he felt from his old rival. It was more complete, as though Piccolo had somehow become an even greater force than before. Kakarot steadied himself, knowing he had to hold on just a little longer. "All right, Piccolo," he thought, a slight smile forming despite his pain. "I'll keep him busy until you get here." With renewed resolve, Kakarot charged at Frieza once again, ready to keep fighting, even if it took every last bit of strength he had left. As Vegeta strode forward to claim his wish from the towering dragon, he couldn't hold back his grin. His dream of immortality was just within reach. "Now it's time to make my wish," he said, his voice confident. But Krillin moved to block him, his expression grim. "I'm not so sure about this, Vegeta." Vegeta's face twisted with irritation as he glared at Krillin. "You don't have a choice, Baldy. Either I get my wish or you die. It's that simple." Krillin's eyes narrowed and his aura suddenly flared, radiating a powerful red light that surprised even himself. Vegeta staggered back, feeling the sudden surge of energy from the human, his power level rising far beyond anything he'd sensed before. "How?" Vegeta stammered, disbelief coloring his voice. Krillin chuckled, his eyes alight with confidence. "I've been training a lot. So now, Vegeta, you're not exactly in a position to be making demands." Denda, watching the standoff with wide eyes, asked, "What's the third wish going to be?" Vegeta's scowl deepened. "I already told you. Wish for my immortality, so I can crush Frieza and end this once and for all." Krillin's stance hardened. "No, I won't." But before the argument could continue, Porunga's massive luminous form began to fade. The brilliant light of the dragon dimmed, and in seconds, Porunga vanished completely. The Dragon Balls, their once vibrant glow gone, turned to cold, lifeless stones, falling silent on the ground. Vegeta looked around, completely baffled. What just happened?" Dende's expression filled with horror as he understood what had transpired. Guru's gone." Without another word, he turned and took off toward Guru's house, panic in his voice. "No, this can't be." Vegeta still looked confused, glancing around at the others for answers. "What does that mean? Why did the dragon just vanish?" Tien's expression was somber as he explained. "Guru was the creator of the Dragon Balls. If he passed away, then they're gone too, permanently." Just then, Tien's head snapped to the side, his senses flaring as he felt Frieza's energy skyrocket to an unfathomable level. "Damn," he muttered, his fists clenching. "He's getting even stronger." Krillin, too, felt the terrifying increase in power. And Kakarot's energy, it's dropping fast. He's giving it everything he has, but it's not enough. Frieza's still way too strong. Without hesitating, Tien took a step forward, his face filled with determination. "I'm going to help him. I can't just stand by and let Kakarot take on Frieza alone." Vegeta scoffed, crossing his arms. "You're no match for that monster. You're just rushing to your death." "I've got to do what I can," Tien replied firmly, his voice steady. Krillin nodded, stepping up beside Tien. "Me too. If we don't help him now, we may never get another chance." Vegeta watched as the two humans prepared to throw themselves into the fight of their lives. He clenched his fists, torn between pride and disbelief. How could he, the prince of all Saiyans, just stand there while two humans were willing to risk everything against the most powerful being in the universe? With a growl of determination, Vegeta launched himself into the air, chasing after the two Earthlings. Meanwhile, Bardock had landed at Guru's house, Raditz's limp form slung over his shoulder. He found the house almost empty. Only Bulma was there, a look of concern on her face. "What happened?" Bulma asked, her voice tense as she looked at Raditz' battered condition. Bardock shook his head, urgency in his voice. "It's a long story, but he needs medical help, fast." Without hesitation, Bulma knelt down, pulling out a small first aid kit. She began wrapping bandages around Raditz's wounds, doing her best to stop the bleeding, but her hands shook as she worked, worry clouding her face. I hate to say it, Bardock, but it doesn't look good. He's lost too much blood." At that moment, Denda landed softly inside the house. Noticing Raditz's weakened state, "I can help," he said, stepping forward with quiet confidence. Bardock looked at the young Namekian, his brow furrowed. "How?" he asked, hope flickering in his eyes. "Guru unlocked my ability to heal," Denda explained simply. He knelt beside Raditz, placing his small hands over the wounded Saiyan's chest. A soft green glow radiated from his palms, bathing Raditz in a warm light. Within moments, Raditz's wounds closed, and his color returned as strength seemed to flow back into him. Raditz blinked his eyes open, looking around in confusion. What happened?" he asked, staring down at his hands, now free of pain. Bardock gave him a relieved smile. "Ginyu did a number on you, but Denda here managed to heal you. It's like you were never even hurt." Bulma looked at Denda in awe, marveling at the young Namekian's ability. "That's incredible, Denda. You saved him." Raditz stood, testing his strength, then clenched his fists, feeling more powerful than ever. "I feel amazing. Actually, better than amazing." He turned, sensing the fierce energy signatures coming from the battlefield. His expression turned grim as he sensed his brother's fading power. "Kakarot," he muttered, his voice thick with worry. "What is it?" Bulma asked, picking up on the tension in his tone. Raditz's gaze was fixed in the distance. "Kakarot's power is dropping. He's giving it everything he has, but Frieza's still holding back. This fight, it's far from over, and I don't know how much longer he can last." Bardock placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his face set with determination. "Then we'll have to go help him. We can't let Kakarot face Frieza alone." Raditz nodded, his voice steady. "You're right." He looked back at Denda, who stood quietly by. "Come with us. We'll need you to heal Kakarot when we get there. I have a feeling he's about to take a real beating." Frieza moved forward with a slow, almost casual stride, his gaze fixed on Kakarot, who lay sprawled on the ground, bruised, bleeding, and struggling for breath. He had to give the Sigyn some credit. He had put up an impressive fight, but now the fierce warrior lay broken before him, utterly defeated. Frieza closed the distance, reaching down to grab Kakarot by the neck and hoisting him up effortlessly. He studied the battered fighter with a twisted smirk. "Stupid monkey," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. He drove his fist into Kakarot's stomach, and Kakarot's body convulsed as blood shot from his mouth, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. But Frieza wasn't finished. He kept punching, his relentless blows driving deeper into Kakarot's gut, each hit sending shockwaves of pain through the Saiyan's body. The tyrant's laughter echoed through the desolate landscape. "Now you're going to die," Frieza said, his voice cold and final. With a wicked grin, he wrapped his tail around Kakarot's neck, tightening it like a noose. Frieza extended one finger, gathering a small, lethal ball of energy at its tip. Without hesitation, he fired, the beam slicing through Kakarot's abdomen. Kakarot's scream of agony pierced the air as the energy tore through his flesh, leaving a smoking wound. Frieza chuckled, savoring the pain he'd inflicted. "Looks like I missed everything vital," he said mockingly, his laughter echoing. He fired another beam, this time piercing Kakarot's chest and puncturing a lung. Kakarot wheezed, his breaths coming in shallow, strained gasps as he clutched at the wound. "Now," Frieza murmured, his finger glowing with a deadly light. "This next one will be through your heart." He aimed, relishing the final blow he was about to deliver. But before Frieza could unleash the fatal attack, a powerful energy blast came barreling in, hitting him with enough force to send him skidding backward, away from his wounded prey. Frieza growled, his eyes narrowing as he steadied himself and looked toward the source of the attack. A tall, imposing figure stood a few feet away, hand raised, green skin illuminated by his intense aura. The Namekian's eyes were fixed on Frieza with a look of calm defiance. "Now it's my turn," the warrior said, his voice carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Frieza's face twisted in annoyance as he took in his new opponent. He tossed Kakarot's limp form aside like a discarded doll and turned to fully face the intruder. "Another Namekian?" he scoffed. "Well, I suppose I can take a moment to deal with you as well." He raised his finger, firing a death beam aimed directly at the newcomer, but the Namekian barely moved. With a casual flick of his hand, he swatted the beam away, as if it were nothing more than a bothersome insect. Frieza's eyes widened in surprise, his amusement replaced by an edge of frustration. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice tinged with disbelief. A Namekian, able to deflect his attacks with such ease? The warrior took a step forward, his expression unyielding. "The name's Piccolo," he said, his voice steady and resolute, "and I'm here to end you." Frieza's shock melted into laughter. "Well, I've heard that before," he sneered, glancing briefly at Kakarot's bruised and battered form. "In fact, I'm fairly certain that this Saiyan said something along those lines just a few minutes ago." Piccolo didn't bother with a response. Instead, he charged, closing the gap between them in an instant. He moved like a shadow, swift and lethal, and drove his leg forward, aiming a powerful kick at Frieza's side. The tyrant barely managed to raise his arm to block, but the attack connected, slamming into his ribs with a force that sent Frieza staggering. Frieza recovered quickly, his eyes blazing with fury. He retaliated with a punch aimed directly at Piccolo's head. But Piccolo was ready, sidestepping the blow with effortless grace. He countered immediately, unleashing a barrage of kicks and punches, each strike precise and devastating. His fists blurred as he pushed Frieza back, not giving him a moment to breathe. The battlefield erupted with the sound of their collision, the impact of their blows creating shockwaves that rippled through the air and shook the ground beneath them. Frieza's grin faded, replaced by a look of growing frustration. He wasn't used to being pushed like this, least of all by a Namekian. But Piccolo pressed on, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination, his every movement displaying a new level of power and purpose. He was no longer just fighting for himself. He was fighting for his planet, for his people, and for the fallen. This battle was far from over. Frieza took a step back, chuckling as he observed Piccolo with a mocking glint in his eye. "I have to admit, you're strong," he said with a casual shrug. "But unfortunately for you, I've only been using a fraction of my true power." His smirk grew wider, flashing dangerously sharp teeth. "Maybe it's time to kick things up a notch." Before Piccolo could even prepare himself, Frieza shot forward, moving with blinding speed. The tyrant's fist collided with Piccolo's stomach in an instant, faster than he could react. The force of the blow drove the air from Piccolo's lungs, and he doubled over, coughing up blood. Frieza didn't give him a chance to recover. He drove his knee up, slamming it into Piccolo's chin with enough force to snap his head back, his vision blurring from the impact. Piccolo felt himself starting to fly backward, but before he could get far, Frieza's tail coiled around his neck, tightening like a vice. As he struggled against Frieza's hold, Piccolo managed to gather enough energy to fire a blast straight at Frieza's face, but the tyrant didn't even flinch, letting the smoke clear with a smirk. When Piccolo saw Frieza's unscathed expression through the dissipating smoke, his eyes widened in shock. Frieza's laughter echoed around them, low and cold. "Do you understand now?" he taunted, backhanding Piccolo across the face. "Do you see how utterly pitiful you are?" Another backhand, harder this time, sent Piccolo's head snapping to the side. "You're nothing more than an insect to me." With a flick of his tail, Frieza hurled Piccolo into the air and raised a single finger, his smirk unwavering. He fired a series of death beams, each one piercing Piccolo's body, searing through muscle and flesh. Piccolo's screams filled the air as he plummeted to the ground with a heavy thud, his body riddled with bleeding wounds. Frieza strolled over, peering down at the bleeding Namekian with a look of disdain. "So many pests to swat, and so little time," he mused, gathering another death beam on his fingertip. This one aimed directly at Piccolo's heart. Not far away, Krillin and Tien landed, their expressions turning grim as they took in the scene. Piccolo was lying on the ground, battered and bleeding, his body barely moving, and a short distance away, Kakarot lay sprawled in a similar state, his breaths shallow and labored. Krillin swallowed hard. "This is bad," he said quietly, feeling the weight of hopelessness settle over him as he saw the state of his friends. Frieza's finger glowed brighter as he gathered energy for the killing blow on Piccolo. Tien clenched his fist. "We need to do something, Krillin. We can't just watch this happen." Krillin gave a determined nod, raising his hand above his head. A thin, sharp disc of energy formed, spinning with deadly precision. "Destructo disc," he shouted, hurling the disc straight at Frieza. Frieza paused, sensing something amiss. He turned just in time to see the energy disc hurtling toward him. His eyes widened in surprise, and he leapt out of the way, but not quite fast enough. The Destructo disc sliced through the tip of his tail, severing it from his body. Frieza let out an enraged scream, clutching the stump where his tail had once been, his face twisting in fury. He turned, his gaze zeroing in on Krillin and Tien, his eyes flashing with murderous intent. "Which one of you did that?" he snarled, his voice dangerously low. Neither Krillin nor Tien answered, holding their ground despite the growing terror. Frieza's lip curled into a snarl. "Fine, I'll just kill both of you." With a roar, Frieza shot forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. Krillin and Tien exchanged a brief, determined glance, their auras flaring bright red as they braced themselves for the fight of their lives. But Frieza was faster than either of them anticipated. In a split second, he phased in behind Krillin, driving his knee into the human's back with a sickening crunch. The force of the blow shattered Krillin's spine, his red aura flickering out as he fell to the ground, his body limp and unmoving. Tien's face was set in determination as he swung a powerful fist toward Frieza's face, pouring every bit of strength he could muster into the attack. With the Kaioken boosting his speed and power, he hoped it would at least rattle the tyrant. But Frieza merely vanished, leaving Tien's fist to strike nothing but air. Before Tien could react, Frieza reappeared behind him, his hand filled with energy. Frieza brought it down like a blade, slicing through Tien's neck in one swift, brutal motion. Tien's body fell forward, lifeless, as Frieza stood over him, a grin of satisfaction on his face. Frieza brushed his hands together, feeling a chilling sense of triumph. It was almost too easy. Exterminating these weaklings felt like nothing more than swatting flies. He turned his gaze toward Kakarot, who lay battered and barely moving on the ground, ready to finally rid himself of the troublesome Saiyan once and for all. Slowly, Frieza raised his foot, preparing to stomp out Kakarot's life. But just as he was about to bring his foot down, a blast struck his back, stopping him in his tracks. Annoyed, Frieza turned to see Vegeta standing defiantly, arm extended, his face tense and determined. Frieza's laughter filled the air. "Oh, that actually tickled," he mocked, brushing a speck of dust from his shoulder. Vegeta's face drained of color, realizing the futility of his attack. He had put everything he had into that blast, yet it hadn't even fazed Frieza. Swallowing down his fear, Vegeta held his ground as Frieza began to approach him with slow, menacing steps. Well, Vegeta," Frieza said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I thought I'd have to go looking for you. How convenient of you to come to me instead." In one smooth motion, Frieza raised a finger and fired a death beam directly into Vegeta's kneecap. The beam hit with pinpoint accuracy, and Vegeta crumpled to the ground, clutching his knee in agony. Frieza continued to close the distance, his steps deliberate, savoring the moment. "Now that you can't run, we can have a little chat, Prince." Frieza fired another death beam, this time into Vegeta's shoulder, sending waves of pain through his body. "It's a shame you had to betray me, Vegeta. We could have continued our arrangement," he smirked, "but even more of a shame that our last conversation was cut short." Gritting his teeth, Vegeta forced himself to his feet, swaying slightly as he tried to keep his weight off his injured knee. He glared up at Frieza, refusing to let the pain show in his eyes. "You might kill me, Frieza," he managed, his voice filled with defiance. "But someday, a Saiyan will be strong enough to bring you down." Frieza laughed, a harsh mocking sound. "Oh, Vegeta, how adorable. But in case you haven't noticed, there aren't exactly many Saiyans left to challenge me. Soon, there won't be any left at all." And with a final flick of his finger, he fired a beam straight through Vegeta's heart, silencing the Saiyan Prince forever. As Vegeta's body fell to the ground, Raditz landed nearby, his expression dark and unflinching as he faced down Frieza. The tyrant turned, barely sparing Raditz a glance. He chuckled, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Raditz," he sneered, "don't make me laugh. Out of all the Saiyans, you're the weakest. Do you really think you stand a chance?" Without hesitation, Frieza raised a finger, firing a quick beam in Raditz's direction. But Raditz merely smirked, swatting the beam aside with ease. "Things change, Frieza," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "I've been doing a little training myself." His aura flared, taking on a brilliant red hue as he activated the Kaioken. Without another word, Raditz charged at Frieza, his movements swift and precise as he lashed out with a probing kick aimed at Frieza's side. The impact was more than Frieza had expected, striking him hard in the ribs. He staggered slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, but he quickly recovered, his own fist shooting forward with deadly intent, driving directly into Raditz's diaphragm. The blow hit its mark, and Raditz's breath left him in a painful gasp. Capitalizing on his advantage, Frieza brought his foot up, slamming it into Raditz's chin and sending him hurtling through the air. Raditz struggled to regain his balance, but before he could steady himself, Frieza unleashed a series of energy blasts that rocketed toward him in quick succession. Raditz crossed his arms in a desperate attempt to shield himself as the blasts struck him, one after another, each explosion shaking the air and sending shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. As the smoke cleared, Raditz remained standing, battered but unwavering. His chest heaved, his face smeared with dirt and blood, but he was still very much in the fight. He looked at Frieza with a defiant smirk. "Is that all you've got?" In a flash, Raditz vanished from sight, reappearing behind Frieza with a fierce battle cry, his elbow aimed directly at the tyrant's neck. But Frieza, sensing the attack, turned swiftly, raising his arm just in time to block the blow. With a wicked grin, Frieza retaliated with a blast to Raditz's chest, only for the beam to pass through a fading afterimage. Raditz had already moved. Before Frieza could react, Raditz reappeared above him, bringing both fists down on the tyrant's head, driving him into the ground with incredible force. Dust exploded around them as Frieza's body struck the ground, creating a massive crater. Not wasting a second, Raditz leapt back, gathering energy between his hands, his voice ringing out across the battlefield. "Double Sunday!" he shouted, unleashing a massive twin beam of energy that tore through the air, barreling straight for the downed tyrant. As the smoke began to clear, Frieza rose slowly from the crater, dusting himself off with an amused chuckle. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to give me this much trouble," he said, brushing the debris from his shoulder. "It seems 20% of my power isn't enough for you." His laughter was cold and sinister. Raditz felt a chill run down his spine. 20%, he repeated, disbelief filling his voice. Even with his enhanced strength, he had barely been holding his own, and Frieza had only been using a fraction of his true power. "Well then," Frieza continued with a smirk, "let's see how you fare against 50% of my full strength." With that, Frieza's aura exploded, his power skyrocketing to an intensity that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. Raditz barely had time to register the sudden surge before Frieza closed the distance, backhanding him across the face. The force of the blow sent Raditz flying, his body slamming into a nearby mountain with a deafening crash. A few moments later, Raditz staggered out of the rubble, rubbing the side of his face where Frieza had struck him. He's unbelievably strong," he muttered to himself, feeling the stinging pain radiate through his body. He knew he had to push himself further, beyond any limit he'd ever tried before. He'd seen Kakarot push the Kaioken to X20 in training, but he himself had only managed a stable X10. Raditz clenched his fists, focusing every ounce of energy he had left. If he had any hope of surviving, he'd have to push beyond his limits. "Kaioken, X25, he shouted, his aura flaring red, brighter and more intense than ever before. But the power surge was too much for his body to handle, and within seconds, his aura flickered and faded, leaving him gasping and weak. His knees buckled, and he fell forward, his body trembling from the overload. He had overdone it. His body simply couldn't withstand that level of power. With a sinking feeling, Raditz realized he had no chance left to defeat Frieza. Meanwhile, Denda landed beside Kakarot, who was lying on the ground, barely breathing. The Saiyan was in bad shape, blood pooling around him, and his energy fading fast. Denda's face was filled with determination as he knelt down, placing his hands over Kakarot's body. A soft green glow radiated from his palms, enveloping Kakarot in healing energy. Within seconds, the Saiyan's wounds began to vanish, his strength returning. Kakarot blinked in surprise, pushing himself up and staring at his hands in awe. I'm still alive," he murmured, testing his restored strength. "I thought I was out of senzu beans." "I healed you," Denda said quietly, his voice steady. Kakarot looked at him, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Denda. Now, get somewhere safe," he said gently. Rising to his feet, he turned his gaze toward the distant battlefield where Raditz was fighting. He watched as his brother's aura flared a brilliant red, then quickly flickered out. Kakarot sensed Raditz's power faltering, while Frieza's overwhelming strength continued to grow. Kakarot took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he calculated his own chances. He might be able to match Frieza with a X20 Kaioken, but he knew it would strain him to his very limits. Closing his eyes, he steadied himself, focusing his energy. When he opened them again, he saw Frieza looming over his weakened brother, ready to deliver the final blow. Kaioken X20! Kakarot shouted, his aura bursting into a fierce, blazing red. In an instant, he shot toward Frieza, moving faster than the tyrant could react. His foot slammed into Frieza's head, sending the tyrant flying away from Raditz and crashing into the ground, a trail of dust and debris marking the path of his fall. Frieza picked himself up from the ground, brushing the dust off his armor, his expression twisted in annoyance. Who had dared to attack him this time? He scanned the battlefield, a glint of fury in his eyes. He was the ruler of the universe, and here he was, swatting at pests who somehow thought they stood a chance against him. Then, he spotted Kakarot, helping Raditz to his feet. "Didn't I already kill you?" Frieza asked, genuinely perplexed as he eyed Kakarot. Kakarot shot him a determined look. "I'm a quick healer," he replied. "Now, your fight is with me again." Frieza smirked, though irritation crept into his voice. "Very well." In a burst of speed, he charged forward, unleashing a flurry of kicks and punches. Kakarot blocked each strike, his focus unwavering, sidestepping with fluid ease and retaliating with punches and kicks of his own. Their blows met in a fierce exchange, neither fighter gaining the upper hand. As they broke apart, Frieza took a step back, his eyes narrowing in frustration and something close to fear. "How do you Saiyans keep getting stronger?" he demanded, his voice shaking slightly. This was impossible. If Kakarot could hold his own against 50% of Frieza's power, the Saiyan might actually become a threat if he grew any stronger. No, he decided. He wouldn't let it come to that. Enough games. It was time to end this. Clenching his fists, Frieza's aura blazed with renewed intensity, his power surging as he forced himself to 75% of his maximum. The ground beneath him cracked and shook as he leveled his cold, murderous gaze at Kakarot. Kakarot felt his own disbelief growing. How was Frieza still getting stronger? He was already maxed out with the Kaioken, and now Frieza was pushing his power even higher. He didn't have much time to dwell on it. Frieza appeared in front of him in an instant, lashing out with the stump of his tail. The blow struck Kakarot across the face, sending him skidding across the ground. Before he could regain his footing, Frieza was there again, punting him into the air with a devastating kick, his maniacal laughter echoing across the battlefield. Kakarot spiraled upward, struggling to control his trajectory, but Frieza was relentless, appearing above him. With a double axe handle, Frieza brought both fists down on Kakarot's head, sending him crashing back to the ground. Kakarot groaned, staggering to his feet, barely able to keep his balance. Frieza didn't give him a second to recover. In the blink of an eye, the tyrant was in front of him again, his fingers tightening around Kakarot's neck like an iron vice. "Foolish Saiyan!" Frieza taunted, his voice dripping with venom. "Did you actually think you could beat me? I'm tired of playing games with you and your kind. I should have wiped out every last one of you when I destroyed your planet." As Frieza squeezed, Kakarot's vision began to blur, his air supply cut off as he clawed at Frieza's unyielding grip. Suddenly, a voice rang out. "No!" Bardock shouted, his aura flaring red with fury as he shot toward Frieza in a desperate attempt to save his father. Frieza glanced over, noticing the young Saiyan hurtling toward him. This one had blue hair, a strange sight, but nothing worth his concern. Without releasing his hold on Kakarot, Frieza phased out of Bardock's path, dodging the attack effortlessly. With a flick of his wrist, Frieza fired a beam of energy that tore through Bardock's stomach, the blast forcing him to the ground. As Bardock struggled to move, blood trickling from his wound, Frieza's cold eyes narrowed. "Now, you'll die." He raised a finger and fired a second death beam, piercing Bardock's heart and ending his life in an instant. Kakarot, still locked in Frieza's grip, watched in horror as his son's body slumped to the ground, lifeless. An overwhelming rage and helplessness exploded inside him, a fury unlike anything he'd ever felt before. His aura flared wildly, his power spiking with every surge of anger coursing through his veins. Flecks of gold began to appear in his aura as he fought against Frieza's hold, his power rising higher and higher. With a final burst of energy, Kakarot's strength forced Frieza to release his grip. Stumbling back, Kakarot landed on his feet, his fists clenched so tightly they shook. "I'm going to kill you," he shouted, his voice raw with rage as lightning crackled around his body. His aura continued to blaze, and more streaks of gold flickered through it. His hair stood up, flashing gold for an instant before returning to black. Kakarot's anger erupted, and he let out a primal scream as his energy continued to skyrocket. His hair flared up once more, this time shifting fully to gold. The ground shook under his feet as his transformation reached its peak. When he opened his eyes, they were no longer the deep black of a Saiyans. They were now a fierce, piercing turquoise. Kakarot stood there, transformed, his gaze locked on Frieza with a new, unbreakable resolve. Kakarot stood motionless, his golden hair crackling with power, his piercing teal eyes locked onto Frieza. His entire body radiated a dangerous, almost primal energy as the wind around them howled from the force of his transformation. The tyrant hovered a few feet away, his expression a mixture of anger and unease. In a flash, Kakarot closed the gap between them. His hand shot out like a viper, clamping around Frieza's wrist with an iron grip. The pressure was immediate, and Frieza's eyes widened as a sharp jolt of pain traveled up his arm. "Gah!" Frieza grimaced, trying to pull away, but Kakarot didn't relent. "You don't like it so much, do you?" Kakarot's voice was calm, almost taunting, as he squeezed harder. His predatory grin made Frieza's blood run cold. Before Frieza could respond, Kakarot drove his knee into the tyrant's gut with devastating force. Frieza lurched forward, a wet, choking gasp escaping him as bile and blood dribbled from his mouth. His body crumpled slightly in the air, the blow robbing him of breath and dignity. But Kakarot wasn't done. With a roar, the Saiyan flung Frieza over his shoulder like a rag doll. The tyrant hit the ground with a loud crash, skidding across the uneven terrain and carving a shallow trench in the rocky surface. Kakarot landed softly, his golden aura still roaring around him. Each step he took toward Frieza was slow and deliberate, his voice cold and filled with venom. "You'll pay for what you've done," he said, his eyes narrowing as he closed in. Frieza groaned and shakily propped himself up on one arm. He spat blood, his fingers trembling as he wiped his mouth. For the first time in his life, true fear flickered in his crimson eyes. He had faced countless warriors, destroyed entire civilizations, and never once doubted his dominance. But now, he stared at someone stronger, someone who could kill him. But Frieza was a survivor. He forced himself to stand, wobbling slightly as he brushed dirt from his once pristine armor. "I must admit," he said, his voice steady despite the strain, "I'm impressed, Saiyan. Your power is truly remarkable." Kakarot stopped in his tracks, crossing his arms. His face was stone, but his voice carried an edge of mockery. "If you're trying to flatter me, it's not working. Save your breath." "Oh, I'm not flattering you," Frieza sneered, his usual arrogance returning in small doses. "I'm merely acknowledging your strength. But let's be clear, Saiyan. What you've seen is far from my full power." Kakarot's brows furrowed, his lips curling into a scowl. "Then power up," he said, his voice like a low growl. "I want you at your best when I beat you to death." Frieza's face twitched, anger replacing his earlier fear. Clenching his fists, he began to focus. His aura exploded outward, waves of energy rippling through the battlefield. The ground beneath them cracked and splintered, unable to withstand the pressure. His body began to transform, muscles swelling and bulging as his power surged. Kakarot stood still, unfazed, watching the transformation with an almost bored expression. When Frieza's power-up finally concluded, the tyrant's frame was bulkier, his veins pulsing with raw energy. He smirked at the Saiyan. "Now," Frieza said, his voice deeper, more menacing, "let's see how you handle me at my full power." Kakarot didn't even blink. "Bring it on." With a roar, Frieza lunged forward, closing the distance in an instant. His strikes came fast and furious, a relentless storm of punches and kicks aimed at every vulnerable point he could see. But Kakarot's movements were impossibly fluid. Each attack was met with a perfectly timed block or dodge, leaving Frieza's blows utterly ineffective. "You'll have to do better than that," Kakarot taunted, effortlessly deflecting another punch. His voice was calm, but his movements carried a sharp, precise brutality. Frieza gritted his teeth in frustration. "You arrogant pest!" he hissed, throwing a roundhouse kick with enough force to split a mountain. But Kakarot caught his leg mid-swing, his grip unyielding. "Your speed's nothing special," Kakarot said, his grip tightening around Frieza's ankle. Before the tyrant could react, Kakarot yanked him forward and drove a fist into his chest. The impact was like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. Frieza's body crumpled as he was launched backward, tumbling through the air like a broken doll before slamming into the ground with an earth-shattering crash. Golden light surrounded Kakarot as he took off, his aura flaring brighter as he shot toward Frieza's downed form. The air around him crackled with power as he closed in. Meanwhile, on King Kai's small planet, the tension was palpable. The small group of observers leaned in, watching the unfolding battle through King Kai's psychic link. "All right, Kakarot," King Kai cheered, his antennas twitching with excitement. "You show him who's boss." Yamcha stood with his arms crossed, a skeptical look on his face. "So who's winning?" "Kakarot is dominating," King Kai replied, his voice brimming with pride. "Dominating?" Nappa interjected, his tone incredulous. "There's no way. Frieza's supposed to be unstoppable." King Kai huffed, clearly irritated by Nappa's doubt. "Kakarot is a Super Saiyan now. His strength is beyond anything you've ever seen." Before the argument could continue, another voice joined the conversation telepathically. "King Kai," the voice said, calm and steady. It was Kami. "This is Kami. Mr. Popo has gathered the Dragon Balls. We're ready to make a wish. Do you have any requests?" King Kai's eyes widened in surprise. Before he could respond, another voice joined the mental link, one full of determination. "Kakarot?" King Kai asked, startled. "Yeah, it's me," Kakarot replied, his voice cutting through the mental chatter. "Sorry to interrupt, but I've got a wish I'd like you to make." Kami's tone was curious. "What is it?" Kakarot's voice was firm. "I want you to wish back all those killed by Frieza and his men." King Kai nodded in understanding. That should bring back Guru as well, and there'll still be one wish left on the Namekian Dragon Balls. "I have a request for that wish as well." Kakarot's voice broke into the mental link, calm but firm. "Use the second wish to move everyone, except Frieza and me, from Namek to Earth. This battle could get messy, and I want everyone far away." Kami's voice carried a note of respect. "Understood, Kakarot. We'll take care of it." King Kai added, "Smart move. Keep everyone out of harm's way while you finish this." The tranquility of Namek's skies shattered as Frieza's fist slammed into Kakarot's jaw with bone-crunching force. The golden-haired Saiyan was sent hurtling backward, tumbling through the air like a rag doll. Before Kakarot could recover, Frieza was already upon him. The tyrant delivered a relentless barrage of blows, fists, elbows, knees, all aimed to cripple. Each strike echoed like thunder through the vast, empty landscape. Frieza roared with a sadistic grin, clasping both hands together and smashing them down in an axe handle strike on Kakarot's head. The Super Saiyan plummeted toward the ground, landing with an earth-shaking crash. The impact left a massive crater, cracks spiderwebbing outward from where his body lay. Hovering above, Frieza sneered, raising his hand. A barrage of energy blasts erupted from his palm, streaking toward the crater. The ground quaked violently as the blasts rained down, each one kicking up dust and debris until the entire area was obscured by a thick, smoky haze. When the barrage ceased, Frieza crossed his arms, a triumphant smirk on his face. "I guess you weren't as strong as you boasted, Saiyan," he said smugly. A voice answered him, calm and confident. "Or maybe I was..." Frieza spun around in shock, only to find Kakarot standing behind him, his golden aura flaring brightly. The tyrant's jaw clenched, his crimson eyes narrowing. "How is this possible?" Kakarot chuckled, his voice steady. "What can I say? I'm just full of surprises." Without hesitation, he lashed out with a punch aimed straight for Frieza's face. But the changeling was quicker, phasing out of sight in an instant. Kakarot's fist hit nothing but empty air. Frieza reappeared behind him, letting out a victorious laugh as he drove his knee into Kakarot's back. Except it wasn't Kakarot at all. The image of the Saiyan flickered and vanished, revealing that it had been an afterimage. Frieza barely had time to register the trick before a searing energy blast slammed into his shoulder from behind, spinning him off balance. Kakarot appeared again, this time in front of him, his fist connecting squarely with the tyrant's face. The blow sent Frieza flying backward like a meteor, skidding through the air before he righted himself. His snarl was feral now, his tail flicking wildly as he charged back into the fray with reckless abandon. Far below, Raditz stood on a rocky outcrop, his long hair whipping in the wind as he watched the battle rage on. His usually hardened features softened for a moment, his eyes following the golden streak that was his brother. "Amazing," Raditz murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He clenched his fists, his pride swelling. You did it, Kakarot. You've become the one to avenge our people. Far away on Earth, Shenron towered above Kami's lookout, his massive serpentine form coiled high into the heavens, the eternal dragon's glowing red eyes fixed on the small group below. You who have summoned me. The dragon's booming voice reverberated through the air. Speak your wish. Stepping forward with quiet authority, Mr. Popo raised his voice. I wish for everyone killed by Frieza or his followers to be brought back to life. Shenron's eyes flashed brighter, his power radiating through the air like a thunderstorm. It will be done, the dragon intoned. In an instant, his energy surged outward, carrying the wish across the universe. On a distant planet, Bardock's eyes snapped open, his body jolting upright, as if waking from a nightmare. For a moment, he stared into the horizon, disoriented. The last thing he remembered was Frieza's looming figure, his father crushed in the tyrant's merciless grasp, and his own desperate futile attempt to fight back. Everything after that was a blur. He rose to his feet, his muscles tensing as he stretched out his senses. His breath caught in his throat. Two immense powers raged nearby, their sheer intensity shaking the very air. He could feel Frieza's vile energy. It was unmistakable. But the second power was a shock. It was his father? Bardock squinted at the distant sky. Two figures zipped back and forth, moving so fast they were barely visible. Energy blasts lit up the horizon like a storm of fire, the shockwaves rattling Bardock's chest even from miles away. What is this? He muttered. Then the realization hit him, and his eyes widened in disbelief. Dad's power, it's higher than Frieza's. How? For the first time in his life, Bardock felt something foreign, a spark of hope. His fists clenched, his jaw tightening. Come on, Dad, he whispered under his breath. Beat him. Beat that monster. Bulma jumped as a loud noise startled her. She spun around, her heart pounding, and stared at the massive figure sitting quietly in Guru's chair. It was Guru himself, alive and well, clearing his throat. Her eyes widened in disbelief. What? How? You were dead? She stammered. This day just keeps getting weirder. Before she could process what she was seeing, a familiar voice echoed in her head. Bulma, I need you to do something for me, she gasped. Kakarot, is that you? Her voice was tinged with relief and confusion. Yes, it's me, Kakarot replied telepathically. His tone was steady but urgent. I need to know, has Guru returned? Bulma glanced back at the Namekian elder, who sat serenely as if nothing had happened. He has, but how is that possible? He died hours ago. We used Earth's Dragon Balls to wish back everyone killed by Frieza, Kakarot explained. Guru was one of them. Bulma's eyebrows shot up in realization. That's incredible. Bulma, listen carefully, Kakarot interrupted. I need you to use the Namekian Dragon Balls to make another wish. Transport everyone on Namek to Earth. Everyone except me and Frieza. Her voice wavered. But you can't stay here alone. We need you, Kakarot. I'll follow right after I finish him, he assured her. But if I'm going to fight him at full power, I can't risk anyone else getting caught in the crossfire. Please, Bulma. She hesitated, but the determination in Kakarot's voice pushed her to act. Okay, but be careful. Without wasting another second, she dashed out of Guru's house. In the distance, Paranga's massive form loomed over the landscape, glowing with divine energy. Bulma sprinted toward the dragon, her mind racing. When she finally reached him, she stood in awe of his sheer size and power. Speak your wish, Paranga boomed, his deep voice shaking the air. For a moment, Bulma felt overwhelmed, but then something strange happened. Words in the Namekian language flowed into her mind effortlessly, as though she had always known them. She suspected it was thanks to Guru, unlocking her potential earlier. With newfound confidence, she spoke clearly in Namekian. I wish for everyone on planet Namek to be transported to Earth, except for Kakarot and Frieza, she declared. Paranga's eyes glowed bright red, his massive body radiating energy. Your wish is granted, he rumbled. In an instant, the ground beneath her feet shimmered and blurred. The dry, rocky terrain of Namek faded away, replaced by the lush greenery and familiar landscape of Earth. Bulma blinked, taking in the trees and blue skies. It was over. She had done her part. Inside Kakarot's mind, King Kai's voice rang out. Your wish is finished. You and Frieza are the only ones left on Namek. Kakarot smirked. Great. Frieza narrowed his eyes in confusion, hovering a few feet away. "What's so great?" he demanded. "We're alone now," Kakarot said, his voice calm but firm. His golden aura flared slightly as he crossed his arms. "While we were fighting, I had some friends use the Dragon Balls. They wished back everyone you've killed, and then they sent everyone else off this planet." Frieza's eyes widened in disbelief. "You were telepathically organizing all that while fighting me?" Kakarot shrugged nonchalantly. "You weren't much of a challenge anyway." The tyrant's expression twisted with rage. "I'll show you a challenge," Frieza roared. He shot into the sky, raising a single finger above his head. A tiny spark of energy appeared on his fingertip, glowing intensely. The spark quickly expanded, growing larger and larger as Frieza poured more power into it. Soon, the ball of energy dwarfed him, its pulsating mass radiating heat and malice. "This attack has enough power to destroy this planet many times over," Frieza declared, his voice dripping with venom. "You can dodge it if you want, but the explosion will annihilate the planet, and you won't survive in space. If I go, you're coming with me." Kakarot floated slowly to the ground, his expression calm despite the looming threat above him. He landed lightly, planting his feet firmly on the cracked earth. Looking up at Frieza, his voice was steady and defiant. "All right, I'll stand right here then." Frieza hurled the massive ball of energy toward Kakarot, his maniacal laughter ringing out as the attack careened through the air. The enormous sphere of destructive power glowed a deep crimson, its heat warping the air around it as it sped toward the lone Super Saiyan below. Kakarot didn't move. He stood firm, his golden aura flickering wildly against the overwhelming force bearing down on him. The death ball collided with him, consuming him in a searing wave of energy that sank into the ground with devastating force. The terrain cracked and split apart, forming a deep crater as the attack dug into the planet. Smoke and ash billowed into the air, obscuring Kakarot from sight. Frieza crossed his arms, a smirk of satisfaction spreading across his face. "So the monkey wasn't so strong after all," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. His laughter echoed across the battlefield, sharp and cruel. But then he stopped, his laughter faltering. His crimson eyes narrowed as he saw something impossible. The massive ball of energy, his own death ball, began to rise from the crater. Frieza's smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure disbelief. Kakarot's golden aura flared as he floated upward, the death ball hovering above him. His teal eyes burned with intensity as he stared at the tyrant. "Is that all you've got?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with mockery. With a roar, Kakarot thrust the enormous energy ball back toward its creator. Frieza's instincts took over, and he raised both arms, bracing against the attack. The sheer force of it pushed him backward, his feet skidding across the ground. He gritted his teeth as he poured every ounce of strength into stopping the energy from overtaking him. "How is this possible?" he thought, his mind racing. "How could a Saiyan stop my death ball?" The massive sphere trembled as the tyrant pushed back against it. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, his muscles straining under the weight of his own attack. But Kakarot wasn't done. "Ka, me, ha, me, ha!" Kakarot's voice rang out like thunder as a beam of brilliant blue energy surged from his palms. The beam struck the death ball, pushing it forward with unstoppable momentum. Frieza's face twisted into a mask of horror as the energy overwhelmed him. "No, no, no, no!" Frieza screamed as the death ball slammed into him. The sphere exploded on impact, sending out a colossal shockwave that tore through the battlefield. The force whipped Kakarot's golden hair back and forth as he shielded his eyes from the debris. When the dust settled, Frieza still stood. His body was battered and bruised, his armor shattered, and blood seeped from numerous wounds. One arm clutched his side as he struggled to remain upright, his breath ragged and uneven. How did you do that?" Frieza wheezed, his voice tinged with both disbelief and desperation. Kakarot floated to the ground, his aura still glowing fiercely. He stared at the tyrant with calm determination. "You're losing energy fast now. That last attack took a lot out of you. You don't even stand a chance anymore." "You dirty Saiyan," Frieza snarled, his rage igniting like a flame. "I'll kill you." With a roar, he raised a finger and fired a death beam directly at Kakarot's heart. Kakarot barely moved. With a flick of his wrist, he swatted the attack away like it was nothing. Before Frieza could react, the Super Saiyan was standing right in front of him. Kakarot's fist shot out, connecting with Frieza's chin in a devastating uppercut. The tyrant's head snapped back, and he staggered from the blow. "That was for all the Saiyans you killed," Kakarot said, his voice low and deadly. Before Frieza could recover, Kakarot drove his knee into the changeling's stomach. The force of the impact made Frieza double over, gasping for air. Kakarot's voice remained calm, but filled with cold fury. "And that's for killing Krillin!" With a sudden movement, Kakarot grabbed Frieza's head, holding it firmly in his grip. He brought his knee up again, this time smashing it into Frieza's face with a sickening crack. Blood sprayed into the air as Frieza stumbled backward, his face a mask of pain and fury. He clutched at his broken nose, his crimson eyes glaring at Kakarot. Kakarot didn't relent. He shot out a powerful kick, slamming his foot into Frieza's chest. The tyrant cried out in pain as he was sent flying backward, skidding across the ground. Before Frieza could rise, Kakarot raised a single finger. A small orb of energy formed at its tip, glowing with deadly intent. "This one's for Bardock," Kakarot said, his voice steady. The energy beam shot forward, piercing through Frieza's chest and out the other side. The tyrant froze, his crimson eyes wide in shock. Blood poured from the wound as he dropped to the ground, clutching at his chest. He gasped for air, his breaths shallow and labored. "You filthy Saiyan," Frieza rasped, his voice barely audible. "You'll pay for this." Before he could say anything more, his body convulsed. His eyes rolled back, and his head slumped to the side. The faint energy that remained within him faded to nothing. Frieza was dead. Kakarot stood silently, his golden aura slowly fading. He closed his eyes, feeling the tyrant's power disappear completely. It was over. Now all that remained was for him to return home. Bardock blinked as he took in his surroundings. A gentle breeze rustled the grass around him, the field stretching out in all directions under a bright blue sky. It was Earth. How he had gotten here was a mystery, but his mind immediately turned to more pressing concerns. His father. Where was his father? He scanned the area, his sharp eyes locking onto a cluster of Namekians standing nearby. Their green skin and white robes were unmistakable, but among them were faces that pulled at his memory. His mother was there, standing tall and composed. Beside her, his Uncle Raditz looked on, his usual arrogant smirk absent, replaced by a look of quiet contemplation. Off to the side, Dende tended to Piccolo, his small hands glowing with healing energy. In the distance, Bardock's eyes caught another familiar figure. Vegeta stood apart from the others, his arms crossed and his scowl deep. The Prince of all Saiyans looked furious, his posture rigid with frustration. Suddenly, Bardock heard a voice echo in his head. "Hey," Kakarot's familiar tone cut through his swirling thoughts. "King Kai's letting me talk telepathically, from Namek to all of you. Frieza is dead, and I'll be home soon. But I can't talk anymore. See you soon." The connection went silent, but the weight of the message lingered. "Kakarot killed Frieza," Vegeta mumbled, his tone low and almost disbelieving. Raditz, standing nearby, folded his arms with a smug grin. "I saw it with my own eyes. He transformed. His hair turned golden, his power skyrocketed, and he beat the crap out of Frieza." Vegeta's scowl deepened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "He's a Super Saiyan?" he muttered, as if the words themselves were a curse. "But I am the Prince of all Saiyans. I should have been the first Super Saiyan. I should be the strongest in the universe." Raditz raised an eyebrow, smirking slightly. "Well, you weren't. Sucks for you, huh?" Vegeta ignored the jab, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "I will find out how Kakarot became a Super Saiyan, and I will surpass him. I will claim my rightful place as the strongest in the universe." Bardock watched the exchange silently, his thoughts turning inward. His father had done what no one thought possible, defeating Frieza. But now, what would happen? His gaze drifted back to Vegeta, whose simmering fury was a stark contrast to the Namekian's quiet relief. Nearly a week later, Bardock sat cross-legged on the floor of his temporary room at Capsule Corp. The once bustling building now buzzed with the low hum of unusual activity as its residents adjusted to their new circumstances. The Namekians had been graciously offered sanctuary by Bulma until they could return to their home planet. With their Dragon Balls following Guru to Earth, they only had to wait 3 months, one Namekian year, before the orbs would become active again. When the time came, they would wish Krillin back to life and use the second wish to send the Namekians home. It was a simple plan, but the waiting gnawed at everyone's patience. The Saiyans, however, were another matter entirely. Unlike the Namekians, they had no home to return to. Vegeta had initially declared his intent to claim Frieza's former empire and rule the galaxy, but Raditz had quickly put an end to that idea, by force if necessary. Since then, Vegeta had thrown himself into relentless training, his obsession with surpassing Kakarot driving him to the brink of exhaustion. Raditz, not one to be left behind, had taken to training just as fiercely, though mostly to ensure Vegeta didn't get too far ahead. Bardock, however, found solace in meditation. Sitting quietly in his dimly lit room, he let his thoughts drift. The week had been surreal, a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. The return of the Saiyan race rested on the shoulders of a small, fractured group, but something in him stirred, a hope that they could rebuild stronger than before. His eyes snapped open as he sensed someone approaching. A soft knock echoed against the door frame before Bulma poked her head inside, her bright blue hair framing her curious expression. "Why so serious?" she asked, leaning casually against the doorway. "Just meditating," Bardock replied, his tone somber. Bulma stepped inside, her arms crossed as she studied him. "Don't worry, kiddo," she said with a reassuring smile. "Your dad will be home soon." Bardock turned to her, his sharp eyes meeting hers. "Have you heard from him?" Bulma's smile faltered slightly, but she kept her voice light. "He sent a message before he left Namek, but I haven't heard much since then. Knowing Kakarot, though, he's probably flying through space like it's a walk in the park." Bardock nodded, though the weight of uncertainty still lingered. "Yeah, I just hope he's okay." "He'll be fine," Bulma said firmly. "Your dad's tougher than anyone I've ever met. If anyone can handle this, it's him." Kakarot exhaled sharply as he pushed himself off the ground, finishing his 1000th push-up under the immense pressure of 100x Earth's gravity. His muscles flexed effortlessly, not even strained. To him, this was just a light warm-up, a way to pass the endless hours of space travel. Despite his newfound strength, he didn't want to grow complacent. Training was second nature, a constant in his life, but no amount of exercise could fully distract him from his thoughts. His mind drifted back to the fight with Frieza. He could still feel the sting of rage bubbling under his skin every time he thought about it, especially when he remembered how the tyrant had killed Bardock. Though Bulma had reassured him that Bardock had been successfully wished back, the memory still tore at him. Anger and guilt flared inside him whenever he let his guard down. He stopped mid-thought, frozen as the familiar sensation of power surged within him. Before he could even react, his hair flashed golden, his eyes shifted to turquoise, and his aura erupted into a brilliant golden blaze. His energy exploded outward, rattling the walls of the gravity chamber. It was happening again. "Frieza!" Kakarot roared, his voice echoing through the small chamber. His fists clenched tightly, his nails digging into his palms. Without thinking, he slammed his fist into the floor. The impact left a deep dent in the reinforced metal and sent tremors throughout the ship. His transformation had taken over again, wild and untamed. This was the 10th time since the battle that he had involuntarily turned into a Super Saiyan. He still hadn't mastered the form. It came and went without warning, his emotions too closely tied to the transformation. Every flare of anger, every spike of frustration risked unleashing his full power. Suddenly, the ship's computer chimed in, its automated voice calm but urgent. "Warning, ship's course disturbed. Collision with planet imminent." The voice cut through Kakarot's fury like a blade. He gasped, his golden aura flickering out as he forced himself back to normal. His hair returned to its usual black, his teal eyes dimming. "Ship's course?" Kakarot muttered, blinking as his surroundings came back into focus. "Planet?" The floor beneath him shook violently as the ship rattled from the disturbance. He leaped to his feet, rushing out of the gravity chamber and into the control room. On the view screen, a planet loomed closer and closer, its surface filling the display. The ship's computer spoke again, activating emergency braking. Crash imminent. Kakarot braced himself as the ship began to slow abruptly. The intense deceleration sent a shudder through the entire vessel. He grabbed onto the nearest console to steady himself as alarms blared around him. Moments later, the ship smashed into the planet's surface with a deafening crash. The impact sent debris flying in all directions, leaving a massive crater where the ship had landed. Smoke and dust billowed into the air, obscuring the view outside. Kakarot coughed as he waved a hand in front of his face, clearing the air. He glanced at the diagnostics panel, watching streams of data scroll across the screen. Despite the rough landing, the ship had held up remarkably well. Its sane spacepod-inspired design had ensured minimal damage. The diagnostics confirmed that only a few minor repairs were needed. He frowned. Looks like I'm stuck here until I can find the parts to fix this thing. Guess I'll have to hope this planet has what I need. Kakarot turned to the computer, his fingers tapping across the console as he queried information about the planet. The ship's database held little information, but what it did reveal was promising. The planet was inhabited, its population advanced enough to have spaceports and technology that could potentially aid him. Several minutes later, Kakarot stepped out of the ship, taking a deep breath of the planet's fresh air. He was dressed in a new fighting uniform, the green fabric vibrant against the black undershirt beneath it. His boots crunched against the rocky surface of the crater as he took in his surroundings. The landscape stretched out before him, vast and barren in this area, but he could see the distant glimmer of a city skyline. Good, Kakarot murmured to himself. At least I didn't crash into anyone's backyard. Last thing I need is to hurt innocent people. Closing his eyes, he focused on sensing the life energy around him. There were power levels in the distance, some faint, others stronger. He turned toward the city, his eyes narrowing as he locked onto the sources of energy. Without hesitation, he launched himself into the air. The wind rushed past him as he soared toward the city, determined to find the resources he needed. And maybe, just maybe, some answers about this unexpected detour. Vegeta stood in the center of the gravity room Bulma had constructed for him, his breath coming in sharp, controlled exhales. Sweat glistened on his forehead, dripping onto the polished floor as he threw a precise punch into the air. His movements were sharp and calculated, each strike loaded with frustration and determination. He growled under his breath, the weight of his fury driving him harder. Kakarot, a low-class Saiyan, had achieved what Vegeta had spent his entire life striving for, the legendary transformation that had haunted their race's history, whispered about as the pinnacle of their power, a Super Saiyan. And yet, it wasn't him, the prince of all Saiyans, who had reached it first. It was Kakarot. The thought was an insult he couldn't bear. With a roar, Vegeta hurled an energy blast across the room. The fiery orb of power crackled as it tore through the air. Before it could reach the far wall, Vegeta vanished, reappearing in its path. He swatted it aside like a fly, sending it careening to the side. He phased out again, appearing above it, swatting it down with the same ease. Each time, he moved faster, forcing himself to push harder, draining his reflexes to the limit. The energy blast spiraled back toward him. This time, Vegeta planted his feet and crossed his arms in front of his face. The blast collided with him full force, the impact driving him backward across the floor. His boots screeched against the ground, leaving scorched marks on the reinforced metal. When the blast dissipated, Vegeta dropped to one knee, his body trembling with exhaustion. His legs shook, and he tried to rise, but his strength gave out, and he collapsed onto all fours. His chest heaved as he gasped for air, his energy completely drained from the relentless punishment he had inflicted on himself. In another part of Capsule Corp, Raditz tilted his head to the side, narrowly dodging a punch from Nappa. The two Saiyans moved in a blur across the gravity chamber, set to 50 times Earth's gravity. "You'll have to do better than that if you want to land a hit," Raditz taunted, a sly grin on his face. "Don't get cocky," Nappa barked. His aura exploded outward in a fiery red glow as he shouted, "Kaioken X10!" The power boost surged through him, and he charged at Raditz with renewed ferocity. Nappa unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks, each strike faster and stronger than before. Raditz dodged as best he could, weaving and ducking through the storm of attacks, but Nappa's speed was too much. A heavy punch connected with Raditz's chin, sending the younger Saiyan flying backward into the wall. The impact shook the room, but Raditz recovered quickly. He snarled and launched himself back at Nappa, his fists blazing with energy. His punches and kicks came in rapid succession, forcing Nappa on the defensive. The older Saiyan blocked and parried as best he could, but Raditz's precision was unrelenting. Nappa saw an opening and shot his knee into Raditz's stomach. The blow knocked the air out of Raditz's lungs, causing him to lurch forward. Nappa grinned, capitalizing on the moment. He brought both fists down in a hammer strike on Raditz's head, sending him crashing to the floor with a resounding thud. Raditz groaned, rubbing his head as he pushed himself back up to his feet. "Not bad," he said, his tone grudgingly respectful. "You're definitely getting stronger, but you still can't win." Raditz's aura ignited in a bright red flare as he activated his own Kaioken, doubling his power. The surge of energy propelled him forward like a rocket. He slammed his fist into Nappa's face, sending the older Saiyan stumbling back. Before Nappa could regain his footing, Raditz followed up with a relentless series of blows, each strike landing with bone-crushing force. Nappa tried to defend himself, throwing a wild punch at Raditz's midsection, but the younger Saiyan vanished in an instant. Nappa's eyes darted around, searching for his opponent, but before he could react, Raditz reappeared behind him. "Too slow!" Raditz growled. He gathered a ball of energy in his palm and slammed it into Nappa's back. The explosion rocked the chamber, filling it with smoke and shaking the walls. When the dust cleared, Nappa was on the ground, breathing heavily, his body sprawled out from the force of the attack. Raditz stepped forward and extended a hand, his expression softening. "I think we've done enough for now," he said, his voice calm. Nappa grunted, reaching up and clasping Raditz's hand. "Fine," he muttered, a trace of irritation in his voice, "but don't think I'm letting you have the upper hand for long." Raditz smirked as he pulled Nappa to his feet. "We'll see about that." King Kai stood with his arms crossed, watching Krillin as the bald warrior unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks into the air. The red aura of the Kaioken surrounded him, pulsing with power as he moved with precision and speed. Each strike was sharper than the last, a testament to the intense training he'd undergone in the past week. King Kai adjusted his antennae, a look of approval crossing his face. "He's really come a long way," he muttered to himself. Krillin's improvements were undeniable. His mastery of the Kaioken technique was better than anyone King Kai had ever seen. But it wasn't just technique. There was something different in Krillin's eyes now, a fire, a determination that hadn't been there before. "I guess dying twice because you weren't strong enough will do that to a guy," King Kai mused quietly. He let out a small sigh, watching as Krillin pushed himself even harder, determined not to fall behind the others again. Kakarot frowned as he spotted plumes of smoke rising on the horizon. His pace quickened as he flew toward the source, his green fighting uniform fluttering in the rushing wind. "What's going on here?" he muttered under his breath. As he drew closer, the answer became clear. A city was under attack. Chaos reigned in the streets below as humanoid invaders wreaked havoc, their energy blasts tearing through buildings and sending civilians fleeing in all directions. Among the chaos, a group of small pink warriors with disproportionately large heads fought back valiantly. Despite their courage, they were clearly outmatched. The invaders were stronger and more ruthless, picking off the defenders one by one. Kakarot's sharp eyes caught one of the humanoid invaders charging a blast aimed directly at a pink warrior. Without thinking, Kakarot surged forward to intercept. But before he could reach the scene, the pink warrior vanished, disappearing in a blink of speed. "What the? How did he move that fast?" Kakarot wondered, momentarily stunned. In the next instant, the pink warrior reappeared behind the invader, slamming a fist into his back. The force of the blow sent the humanoid stumbling forward, but he recovered quickly. The invader turned, sneering as he caught the pink warrior's wrist in a tight grip. "Ready to die?" the invader growled, his laugh cold and cruel. Before the invader could strike, his fist was stopped mid-swing. A larger hand had caught it, gripping tightly. The invader turned, his sneer fading as he found himself staring at Kakarot's calm yet intense face. "What's going on here?" Kakarot asked, his voice steady but firm. The invader yanked at his captured fist, but couldn't budge it. "Beat it," he snapped, "or you'll suffer the wrath of Lord Frieza." At the mention of the name, Kakarot's expression darkened. "Frieza, huh?" he said coolly. "I don't think anyone will be suffering his wrath anytime soon." With a flick of his wrist, Kakarot sent the invader flying. The warrior slammed into the ground several feet away, unconscious from the sheer force of the backhand. Kakarot turned in time to see another blast aimed at one of the pink defenders. He phased out of sight, reappearing just in time to block the attack with his hand. The invaders quickly realized that Kakarot was no ordinary opponent. One by one, they redirected their efforts toward him. Unfortunately for them, they were no match for the warrior who had slain their master. Kakarot moved like a whirlwind, his strikes swift and precise. Within seconds, the entire group of attackers lay unconscious on the ground, scattered like fallen leaves. "Thank you," one of the pink aliens said, approaching cautiously. "You're welcome," Kakarot replied, his tone warm. "What happened here?" "Frieza has taken an interest in our planet," the alien explained. He sent these warriors to wipe us out. Kakarot's gaze shifted to the unconscious bodies of the invaders. You won't have to worry about them anymore, he said confidently. The alien's face showed relief, but was still tinged with fear. I just hope Frieza doesn't send more. Kakarot shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. Frieza's dead. He won't be giving you any more trouble. The alien's eyes widened in shock. Dead? How is that possible? Kakarot's smile grew slightly. Let's just say he won't be coming back. The pink alien's shock gave way to gratitude. How can we thank you for saving us? My ship crash landed here, Kakarot explained. I need a few parts to repair it. That shouldn't be a problem, the alien replied quickly. Our planet has advanced technology. If we can't repair your ship, we can provide you with another to get you where you need to go. It's the least we can do for someone who saved our planet. Thank you, Kakarot said sincerely, but really, it was no trouble. The alien's expression grew somber. Those men, they killed 10 of our best warriors. Kakarot's face fell slightly. I'm sorry to hear that. We'll move on and rebuild, the alien said with quiet determination. But in the meantime, come. Let Yardrat offer you our hospitality. Kakarot nodded appreciatively. Thank you. I do have one question though. What is that? Kakarot asked, tilting his head in curiosity. The Yardratian spokesman looked at him, confused for a moment. What is what? Well, earlier, I saw one of your warriors fighting off the invaders, Kakarot explained, gesturing toward the city. He dodged an energy blast so quickly, I couldn't even follow his movements. I was wondering how he did that. Ah, you must be referring to the instant transmission technique, the spokesman replied, a hint of pride in his tone. It's a skill unique to our people. It allows the user to instantly move from one location to another, as long as they can sense a nearby energy signature. Kakarot's eyes widened, and a grin spread across his face. Wow, that sounds incredible. Instantly moving like that, it could be so useful. It is, the spokesman agreed, nodding. As a species, we Yardratians aren't particularly strong, but we've developed a number of techniques that make up for our lack of raw power. Kakarot scratched the back of his head, thinking about the possibilities. Do you think you could teach me this instant transmission thing? The spokesman smiled warmly. Of course, we would be happy to teach you. Bulma leaned back in her luxurious bathtub, letting the hot water ease the tension from her shoulders. Steam filled the bathroom, curling around her as she closed her eyes and let out a contented sigh. After a long, chaotic day, this was exactly what she needed. The peaceful moment didn't last long, though. The shrill ring of her phone echoed through the house, shattering the quiet. Groaning, Bulma reached for the phone on the nearby counter, sloshing water over the edge of the tub in the process. Hello, she said, trying to keep the annoyance out of her voice. Hey, babe, it's me, came Kakarot's familiar voice through the line, slightly crackling, but unmistakable. A smile instantly replaced her irritation. Hey, what's up? I figured you'd be home in the next day or so. Well, Kakarot began, his tone a little sheepish. I ran into a bit of a snag. The ship got damaged and crash landed. Bulma's smile disappeared, replaced by concern. That's terrible. Are you okay? I'm fine, Kakarot assured her quickly. The natives here are really nice, and they said they can fix the ship, but it might take a while. Bulma leaned back against the edge of the tub, relief washing over her. I'm glad you're all right, but that's too bad. I was looking forward to giving you your congratulations for beating Frieza present. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Bulma could swear she heard a faint tension in Kakarot's breathing when she mentioned Frieza's name. That sounds great, he said eventually, though his voice seemed distant. What's wrong? Bulma asked gently, her tone softening. Kakarot hesitated before speaking. I might not be coming back right away, even after the ship is repaired. Bulma sat up straighter in the tub, frowning. Why not? Well, Kakarot said, choosing his words carefully. I didn't tell you how the ship got damaged. While I was training, I transformed into a Super Saiyan again. It happened when I was thinking about Frieza, and I couldn't stop it. I can't control when it happens, Bulma. Her brow furrowed as she listened. You mean it's still happening? Even now? Yeah, he admitted. It's completely unpredictable. I don't want to put you or Earth in danger if I lose control. I need to figure out how to stop the spontaneous transformations before I can come back. Bulma sighed, understanding the weight of what he was saying, but still feeling the sting of disappointment. So, when do you think you'll be able to come back? I don't know for sure, Kakarot replied honestly, but I promise I'll work as hard as I can. As soon as I can control it, I'll come back. I understand, Bulma said quietly, her voice steady, despite the emotion stirring within her. "Just promise me you'll try to hurry. I'll have a special surprise waiting for you when you get here." There was a slight pause on the line, and then she heard Kakarot chuckle softly. "I look forward to that, my love." Hearing the warmth in his voice brought a small smile back to Bulma's face. "Stay safe, Kakarot." "I will," he said. "Take care, Bulma. I love you." The call ended, leaving Bulma sitting in her now lukewarm bath, her thoughts swirling with a mix of pride, worry, and anticipation.